The champagne glass shattered on the marble floor. My father stood frozen, mouth hanging open, staring at me like he'd seen a ghost. 30 seconds earlier, he had pointed at me in front of 200 VIP guests, politicians, executives, old money families, and announced with a smug laugh, "This is my daughter, the poor one. Couldn't even afford a decent Christmas dress." The room had chuckled politely. My mother smiled. My sister smirked. I said nothing. I had learned silence 32 years ago. But then the CEO walked over, the most powerful man in the room, the man my father had spent the entire evening desperately trying to impress. He took my hand with both of his, and he bowed. "Ms. Carter," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "It's an honor to finally meet you. We hope to earn your $80 million contract." The laughter stopped. My father's glass slipped from his fingers. My mother's face went white. And my sister, the golden child, the favorite, the one who had everything handed to her while I got nothing, looked like she was about to faint. That satisfying moment. It was just the beginning. Because what my family didn't know was that I had discovered their secrets. The money they stole from me, the lies they told about me, the inheritance they hid from me for 14 years. They thought I was the weak one, the disposable one. They were wrong. This is the story of how my family threw me out into the snow on Christmas Eve, and how I took back everything they stole. Stay with me. You won't believe what happens next. My name is Melissa Carter. I am 32 years old, a single mother of 2, and the founder of a technology consulting firm that most people have never heard of. I built it from nothing in silence, while my family believed I was barely surviving. That Christmas Eve, I pulled into my parents' driveway and sat in my car for a full minute, staring at the mansion glowing with thousands of white lights. Luxury vehicles lined the circular drive. Through the tall windows, I could see elegant figures moving with champagne glasses, their laughter faint through the cold glass. I glanced in the rearview mirror at my children. Emma, my 8-year-old, was straightening her red velvet dress. Lucas, just 5, was already half asleep, his small hand clutching a wrapped present for his grandparents. "Ready?" I asked them, forcing brightness into my voice. Emma nodded, but her eyes were uncertain. She was old enough to sense the tension that always surrounded these visits. Old enough to notice that Grandma's hugs were stiff, that Grandpa rarely spoke to Mommy, that Aunt Victoria received very different treatment than we did. I squeezed her hand. "It's just a few hours. We'll say hello, have some food, and then we'll go home to our own Christmas." The moment we stepped through the front door, my mother appeared. She was wearing a designer gown that probably cost more than my first car. Her silver hair perfectly styled, her smile as polished as the marble floors. But when she looked at me, that smile tightened. "Melissa," she said, her eyes scanning my simple black dress. "That's what you're wearing." "It's a nice dress, Mom." "It's plain." She leaned closer, lowering her voice so the nearby guests wouldn't hear. "I told you this was an important party. Your father's boss is here, important clients. You look like you wandered in from a funeral." I felt the old familiar shame creeping up my neck. 32 years old, a successful businesswoman, and my mother could still make me feel like a disappointing child with a single glance. "And keep the children quiet," she added, already turning away. "Stay near the back. Don't draw attention. Don't draw attention. The unofficial motto of my entire childhood. I guided Emma and Lucas toward a corner of the grand living room, away from the glittering Christmas tree, away from the important conversations. My father was holding court near the fireplace, surrounded by men in expensive suits. He saw me arrive. Our eyes met briefly. He looked away without acknowledgement and continued his story, earning appreciative laughter from his audience. My sister Victoria swept past in a stunning emerald gown, her blonde hair cascading over bare shoulders. She paused just long enough to look me up and down with barely concealed contempt. "Oh, you actually came," she said. "Brave." Then she was gone, joining the golden circle of guests who belonged here. I found a quiet spot near the window and helped Lucas onto a chair. Emma stood close to me, watching the party with wide eyes. "Mommy," she whispered, "why doesn't Grandma like your dress?" "She just has different tastes, sweetheart. I think you look pretty." I kissed her forehead, blinking back the sting in my eyes. "Thank you, baby." An hour passed. I spoke to no one except the catering staff, who offered me sparkling water. I watched my parents work the room like professionals, charming every guest, basking in compliments about the gorgeous home, the magnificent tree, their wonderful family. Victoria was introduced to everyone as our talented daughter. I was not introduced at all. Then I heard my father's voice rise above the crowd. "Harrison, so glad you could make it." I looked up to see my father practically bowing to a silver-haired man in an impeccably tailored suit. Mr. Harrison, the CEO of my father's company, the man my father had been desperate to impress for 20 years. My father was beaming chest, puffed with pride at having such an important guest in his home. They shook hands, exchanged pleasantries, and then my father did something that made my blood run cold. He pointed directly at me. "You want to know something funny, Harrison?" my father said loudly, making sure everyone nearby could hear. "That's my oldest daughter over there, the poor one in the family." He laughed as if he'd told a clever joke. "Couldn't even afford a proper Christmas dress." Polite laughter rippled through the guests. My mother smiled tightly. Victoria smirked from across the room, and I stood there, face burning, frozen in humiliation, my children looking up at me with confusion. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to grab my kids and run. But I stayed silent, just as I had stayed silent my entire life. I would not cause a scene. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. But then something extraordinary happened. Mr. Harrison's polite smile vanished. He stared at me with an expression I couldn't read. Then he stepped away from my father, walked directly toward me, and extended both hands to take mine. "Ms. Melissa Carter," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. I nodded, unable to speak. "It's an honor to finally meet you in person." He spoke with genuine respect, almost reverence. "We've been hoping to discuss the partnership proposal. Your company's work is exceptional. We very much hope to earn your $80 million contract." The room went completely silent. Behind him, I heard glass shatter against marble. I turned to see my father standing motionless, champagne pooling at his feet, his face drained of all color. My mother looked like she might faint. Victoria's smirk had disappeared entirely. For the first time in 32 years, every person in that room was looking at me, not with pity, not with dismissal, with shock. And that satisfying moment of vindication. It was only the beginning of what would become the most painful and liberating week of my life. But to understand how I got here, let me take you back to where it all began. My earliest memory is of watching my sister unwrap Christmas presents while I sat empty-handed on the living room floor. I was 4 years old. Victoria was 2. The tree towered above us, covered in sparkling ornaments and golden ribbons. Beneath it sat a mountain of beautifully wrapped gifts, and I remember feeling such excitement, such anticipation, waiting for my name to be called. Victoria's name was called again and again, a porcelain doll with real hair, a pink tricycle with streamers on the handles, stuffed animals and picture books, and a tiny rocking chair painted white with roses. Each time she tore open the paper, my parents clapped and praised her, taking photographs, telling her how special she was. I kept waiting. When the last present was opened, I looked up at my mother and asked where my gifts were. She barely glanced at me. "You're the big sister," she said, as if that explained everything. "Big sisters don't need as much. Victoria is delicate. She needs special things to help her grow." I didn't understand what delicate meant. I only understood that my sister had a pile of treasures and I had nothing. That pattern repeated every year, every birthday, every occasion that should have included joy. Victoria received new dresses while I wore her old ones, even when they were stained or torn. Victoria got dance lessons, piano lessons, art classes. I got extra chores. When relatives sent birthday money, my parents took mine for safekeeping and never returned it. When Victoria's money arrived, she was taken shopping that same afternoon. My parents had explanations that sounded almost reasonable if you didn't think about them too carefully. Victoria was sensitive, they said, so she needed more attention. Victoria struggled in school, so she needed encouragement. Victoria was beautiful and social traits that required investment to cultivate. I was sturdy, practical, self-sufficient. I didn't need the same things because I was built differently. But a child doesn't feel sturdy when she's watching her sister unwrap present after present while holding nothing in her own hands. A child doesn't feel self-sufficient when she's crying herself to sleep, wondering what she did wrong to deserve so little love. I wasn't strong. I was simply learning to survive without the things other children took for granted. By the time I was 8, I had become the unofficial servant of our household. Every morning before school, I made breakfast for Victoria while she slept an extra hour. Every evening, I helped her with homework she couldn't be bothered to attempt herself, then completed my own assignments late into the night. I cleaned her room, washed her dishes, ironed her clothes for special occasions. When she broke something, I was blamed for not watching her carefully enough. When she cried, I was scolded for not keeping her happy. My own achievements went completely unnoticed. I brought home perfect report cards, and my mother would glance at them and say, "Victoria could do this too if she tried. She's just too busy being social." I won a spelling bee in 5th grade, the only trophy I ever earned, and my father forgot to attend the ceremony. When I reminded him that night, he shrugged and said he'd had more important things to handle. The trophy sat on my dresser for a week before it mysteriously disappeared. I never found it, and I learned not to ask. I tried everything to earn their love. I was quiet when they wanted quiet, helpful when they needed help, invisible when visibility was inconvenient. I thought if I was perfect enough, useful enough, agreeable enough, eventually they would see me. Eventually they would love me the way they loved Victoria. They never did. The moment I truly understood my place in this family came on Christmas morning when I was 12 years old. For 3 months, I had saved every penny of my lunch money, eating nothing during school hours, enduring the hunger pains that came each afternoon. I wanted to buy Victoria a bracelet I'd seen in a store window, a delicate silver chain with a small heart charm. I thought if I gave her something beautiful, something that cost me real sacrifice, maybe she would finally see me as a sister worth loving. Maybe my parents would see that I had value too. I wrapped the bracelet myself in tissue paper I'd found in the trash, tied it with a ribbon I'd saved from someone else's gift. On Christmas morning, I waited until Victoria had opened all her presents, then approached her shyly and held out my small package. Before Victoria could take it, my mother snatched it from my hands. "What is this?" she demanded. "It's a present," I said. "For Victoria. I saved up and bought it myself." My mother tore open the tissue paper, examined the bracelet, and her face twisted with anger. "Where did you get money for this?" "I saved my lunch money." The slap came so fast I didn't see it coming. My cheek burned and tears sprang to my eyes as I stumbled backward. "You wasted money on this," my mother hissed. "Money that could have gone towards something useful, you stupid, ungrateful girl." I stood there trembling, unable to speak. Then my mother's expression shifted. She turned to Victoria, smiled warmly, and handed her the bracelet. "Look what I got you, sweetheart. A little extra surprise." Victoria took the bracelet, examined it with mild interest, and said, "It's okay, I guess." She never thanked me. She didn't even look at me. She didn't know, and she would never know that her sister had gone hungry for 3 months to give her that small token of desperate love. That night I lay in my bed with my hand pressed against my still stinging cheek, and I made a vow to myself. I would escape this house. I would build a life so far from their reach that they could never hurt me again. I would become someone not for them, but for myself. And I would never ever need them again. I was 12 years old, and I had already learned the cruelest lesson a child can learn, that some parents simply do not love all their children equally, and no amount of goodness or sacrifice or desperate hoping will change that truth. But the real betrayal, the one that would shape everything that came after, hadn't happened yet. The betrayal I mentioned would come later, woven into discoveries I couldn't have imagined during those early years of survival. But first, I had to escape. And escape required something my family never believed I possessed the strength to build a life entirely on my own. I graduated high school with honors that no one in my family acknowledged. My parents attended Victoria's graduation ceremony 2 years later with flowers and a party, but mine passed without a single photograph. I applied to college alone, filled out financial aid forms alone, and packed my belongings in 2 cardboard boxes without anyone offering to help. The morning I left for university, my mother handed me $20 and said, "Don't come back asking for more." I never did. College became a blur of exhaustion and determination. I worked 3 jobs simultaneously: a morning shift at the campus coffee shop, starting at 5 afternoon hours at the library shelving books, and weekend nights cleaning offices in a downtown building. I maintained a full academic scholarship through grades I earned on 4 hours of sleep and an endless supply of instant noodles. My dorm room was the cheapest option available, a tiny space I shared with a roommate who came from a loving family and couldn't understand why I never went home for holidays. During those years of grinding poverty and relentless work, I thought often of my grandmother. She was my father's mother, a gentlewoman with silver hair and hands roughened by decades of hard work. Unlike everyone else in my family, Grandma saw me. When I visited her small apartment as a child, she would hold my face in her palms and tell me I was special. She saved cookies for me, asked about my schoolwork, remembered my favorite colors and songs. In a family where I was invisible, Grandma made me feel real. She fell ill during my senior year of high school, and I visited her in the hospital as often as I could manage without my parents noticing. They rarely went themselves too busy with Victoria's social calendar to sit beside a dying old woman. But I went. I held her hand and read to her from books she loved, and I tried not to cry when I saw how thin she had become. The last time I saw her, 3 days before she passed, she gripped my hand with surprising strength and pulled me close. Her voice was barely a whisper, but I heard every word clearly. "You are a diamond, my girl. Don't let anyone convince you that you're just a stone." Those words became my anchor through every difficult night, every empty meal, every moment when I wanted to give up. When professors praised work I had completed on no sleep, I heard Grandma's voice. When employers promoted me ahead of others, I remembered her faith. She had seen the diamond when everyone else saw only a stone, and I was determined to prove her right. I graduated near the top of my class and took an entry-level position at a consulting firm in the city. The salary was modest, but it was mine earned through my own effort without a single dollar from the family that had discarded me. I rented a small apartment, bought second-hand furniture, and began the slow process of building a professional reputation. It was there in that first corporate job that I met Margaret Chen. Margaret was 60 years old, a senior executive with silver-streaked hair and eyes that missed nothing. She had built her career in an era when women in business faced obstacles I could barely imagine, and she had succeeded through intelligence, persistence, and an absolute refusal to be underestimated. Most of the young employees were intimidated by her. I was fascinated. She noticed me during a meeting where I remained silent while others spoke over each other, competing for attention. Afterward, she called me into her office and asked why I hadn't shared my ideas. I told her honestly that I had learned long ago that speaking up only invited criticism, so I preferred to observe and work quietly. Margaret studied me for a long moment, then said something that changed my life. "Your family trained you to be invisible. I can see that. But here's what they didn't understand: invisible people see everything. While others are performing, you're learning. While they're competing for attention, you're gathering information. That's not a weakness, Melissa. That's a superpower. Use it." She became my mentor over the following years, teaching me skills no classroom could provide. She showed me how to negotiate contracts, how to read people, how to invest money wisely instead of spending it on things designed to impress others. She taught me that self-worth couldn't be given by others. It had to be built from within, brick by brick, through actions aligned with my own values. Most importantly, Margaret believed in me. She was the first older woman since my grandmother, who looked at me and saw potential instead of disappointment. Her faith helped heal wounds I hadn't realized were still bleeding. By the time I was 25, I had saved enough money and learned enough skills to take the terrifying leap into entrepreneurship. I launched my own consulting firm, starting with small contracts for local businesses, reinvesting every dollar of profit back into growth. I worked 16-hour days, handled every task myself, and slowly built a client base that recognized quality work delivered without drama or ego. I deliberately kept a low profile. No social media presence, no flashy purchases. When I attended occasional family events, which I did only to maintain some thread of connection, I wore simple clothes and drove my old reliable car. I told no one about my business, my savings, my slowly expanding success. I knew my family too well. If they discovered I had money, they would find ways to take it. They would manipulate guilt and exploit until nothing remained. So I stayed invisible, just as they had trained me to be. I let them believe I was struggling, unmarried, unsuccessful. My mother would make comments about how Victoria was thriving, while I couldn't even find a husband. My father would shake his head with performative disappointment. Victoria would smirk at my sad little life. None of them knew that my company's revenue had crossed into 7 figures. None of them suspected that the daughter they dismissed was quietly becoming more successful than any of them could imagine. What I didn't know was that Grandma had left me something my parents had been hiding for 14 years. The secret my grandmother left behind would reveal itself in time, emerging when I least expected it and most needed it. But before that revelation, before the truth about her hidden gift came to light, there was another chapter of my story that needed to unfold. A chapter that would demonstrate once and for all the impossible mathematics of trying to earn love from people incapable of giving it. 3 years before that fateful Christmas party, when I was 29 years old, I received a phone call that changed everything. The caller didn't identify herself, but her voice was familiar. Mrs. Patterson, an elderly neighbor who had lived next door to my parents for decades. She had always been kind to me as a child, slipping me cookies when my mother wasn't looking, telling me I was a good girl when no one else seemed to notice. Now her voice trembled with worry. "Melissa, I shouldn't be calling you. Your parents would be furious if they knew, but someone needs to tell you what's happening." She explained that my parents were in serious financial trouble. Property taxes had gone unpaid for 3 years, and the county was preparing to initiate foreclosure proceedings. Additionally, the roof had been leaking for months, causing damage so severe that the house had been flagged for safety code violations. If the roof wasn't repaired and the taxes weren't paid within 60 days, my parents would lose everything. "They're too proud to ask for help," Mrs. Patterson said. "And Victoria, well, she doesn't seem to understand the situation. She was over here last week showing off a new designer handbag while your father was on the phone crying to the bank. I thought you should know." I thanked her and hung up, sitting in silence for a long time. My parents had never asked me for anything except my absence. They had made clear throughout my entire life that I was a burden, an embarrassment, a daughter they wished they'd never had. Every logical part of my brain screamed that I should let them face the consequences of their own choices. They had given me nothing. Why should I save them? But logic has never governed the heart of a child who still, despite everything, wants her parents to love her. I thought about my father, cruel as he was growing old and homeless. I thought about my mother, cold as she had always been, losing the house she had spent decades filling with beautiful things. I thought about the holidays I might still attend, the grandchildren I might someday have, who deserved to know their family history even if that history was painful. I thought about who I wanted to be regardless of who they had been to me. And I made a decision that my accountant called foolish, and my therapist called complicated, and my heart called necessary. I paid the $26,000 anonymously. I cleared the property tax debt, hired contractors to repair the roof, and instructed everyone involved to say only that a family friend had helped. I didn't want recognition. I didn't want gratitude. I simply couldn't bear the thought of my elderly parents losing their home, even if they had made my childhood home feel like a prison. The contractors completed their work in 3 weeks. I received confirmation that the taxes had been paid and the code violations had been cleared. My parents' house was safe, their crisis averted by a daughter they considered worthless. I told no one. I expected nothing in return. I had made peace with the reality that this act of love would remain invisible, just like every other sacrifice I had ever made for them. 2 months later, I attended a family gathering for my father's birthday. I didn't want to go, but Emma was old enough to ask about her grandparents, and I felt obligated to maintain some connection for my children's sake. So I dressed simply, brought a modest gift, and prepared myself for the usual dismissals and comparisons. What I wasn't prepared for was hearing my father's booming voice as I walked through the front door. "Can you believe what our Victoria did?" he was saying to a group of impressed neighbors. "She sacrificed her entire savings to save this house. $26,000, paid the taxes, fixed the roof, handled everything. That's the kind of daughter she is. Always thinking of her family." My mother stood beside him, beaming. "We're so blessed to have her. Victoria has always been the responsible one, the one we can count on. She didn't even tell us what she'd done until afterward. So humble, our girl." Victoria herself was accepting congratulations with practiced modesty, dabbing at fake tears. "I just couldn't bear to see Mom and Dad suffer," she said. "Family comes first, always." I stood frozen in the doorway, invisible as always, listening to my sister take credit for my sacrifice. Victoria, who had never worked a real job in her life. Victoria, whose Instagram was filled with designer handbags and luxury vacations funded by our parents' indulgence. Victoria, who couldn't have saved $26,000 if her life depended on it, because she spent money as fast as she could convince others to give it to her. My father caught my eye across the room. For one moment I thought perhaps he knew the truth. Perhaps he would acknowledge what I had done. Instead, he turned away and continued praising Victoria. I should have stayed silent. I had survived 30 years in this family by staying silent. But something broke inside me that day, some last remaining hope that I could ever be seen. Later that evening, when the guests had departed and only family remained, I found my mother alone in the kitchen. I took a deep breath and spoke carefully, keeping my voice neutral. "Mom, I need to tell you something. The money that saved the house, the taxes, and the roof, that wasn't Victoria. It was me. I paid it anonymously because I didn't want to make a big deal out of it, but I think you should know." My mother looked at me with an expression I will never forget. Not surprise, not gratitude, not even curiosity. Just cold, dismissive amusement. "Victoria is the pride of this family," she said as if I hadn't spoken at all. "You just did what any daughter should do. It's your duty. Don't try to compete with your sister Melissa. You'll only embarrass yourself." She walked away without another word. I stood alone in that kitchen, finally understanding with brutal clarity the truth I had spent my whole life trying to deny. I could save them 100 times. I could sacrifice everything I had. And they would still choose Victoria. They would always choose Victoria. Some debts of love can never be repaid because they were never acknowledged in the first place. But that $26,000 would become more than just money. It would become a weapon and a key to the truth. Now back to that Christmas party. The champagne was still pooling on the marble floor where my father had dropped his glass, and no one had moved to clean it up. The entire room remained suspended in that moment of shock, 200 pairs of eyes fixed on the scene unfolding between Mr. Harrison and the daughter who had just been publicly mocked as the poor one in the family. Mr. Harrison still held my hand between both of his, and his expression carried none of the polite distance I had seen him offer other guests throughout the evening. This was genuine respect, the kind that cannot be performed or faked. Ms. Carter, I must tell you how impressed our entire board has been with your company's trajectory. He continued, his voice carrying clearly across the silent room. Your valuation just crossed $400 million last quarter. The work you've done in sustainable technology, particularly the carbon offset programs for mid-sized manufacturers, has positioned you as a leader in the field. Frankly, we've been trying to get a meeting with you for months. I heard gasps behind me, the soft clicking of phone screens being unlocked. Guests were searching my name, discovering what my own family had never bothered to learn. And that scholarship fund you created for underprivileged women. Mr. Harrison added, his voice warming further. The one that provides full tuition plus living expenses plus mentorship. My own niece was a recipient 3 years ago. She graduated top of her class last spring. Engineering degree. She talks about your foundation constantly, about how it changed her life. I've wanted to thank you personally for years. I felt my cheeks flush, not from embarrassment this time, but from something unfamiliar. Pride, perhaps. Or the strange sensation of being seen after a lifetime of invisibility. I'm so glad she's doing well, I said softly. That program means everything to me. It shows in every detail, he replied. The personal letters you write to each recipient, the career counseling, the way you follow up even after they graduate. That's not just philanthropy, Ms. Carter. That's genuine care. Behind Mr. Harrison, I could see my father standing exactly where I had last seen him, except now his face had shifted from shock to something more complex. His mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish gasping for water. The confident, boastful man who had commanded this room moments ago had vanished entirely. What happened next felt like dominoes falling one after another, each collision more devastating than the last. A woman in an elegant burgundy gown approached me, introducing herself as Dr. Catherine Wells, director of the Regional Children's Hospital. Ms. Carter, I had no idea you would be here tonight. I've been hoping to thank you in person. Your donation last year funded our entire pediatric oncology wing renovation. 42 children have received treatment in that space already. You saved lives. Before I could respond, a silver-haired gentleman joined our growing circle. Dean Richard Thornton from the State University, a man my father had tried unsuccessfully to befriend for years. Melissa Carter. I should have made the connection when I saw you earlier. Your anonymous scholarship endowment has supported over 200 students at our institution. The board wanted me to extend a personal invitation to our spring gala. We'd be honored to recognize your contributions publicly if you're willing. I noticed movement in my peripheral vision. Victoria had been standing near the Christmas tree surrounded by her usual admirers, but that circle had dissolved entirely. People were drifting away from her, gravitating toward the real story unfolding across the room. My sister stood alone now, her emerald gown suddenly looking less like elegance and more like a costume. Her perfectly practiced smile had vanished completely. A venture capitalist whose name I recognized from Forbes pressed a business card into my hand and asked if I had 15 minutes for coffee next week. A state senator mentioned a sustainable energy initiative that could benefit from my expertise. A tech journalist discreetly asked if I would consider an interview for a profile piece she was writing about female founders changing the industry. Each interaction was a revelation to the people who had known me only as the disappointing daughter. The poor one, the embarrassment best kept in the corner where she couldn't shame the family. Every handshake, every expression of gratitude and respect landed on my parents like physical blows. My mother had retreated to the edge of the room, one hand clutching her pearl necklace so tightly I thought the strand might snap. Her face had gone pale beneath her careful makeup, and I saw her exchange frantic glances with my father. They were trying to figure out how to respond, how to recalibrate, how to claim credit for a daughter they had spent decades dismissing. But there was no way to spin this. Too many people now knew the truth. Mr. Harrison guided me slightly away from the growing crowd of admirers and produced an elegant leather folder from his inside jacket pocket. The company logo was embossed in gold on the cover. "This is our formal partnership proposal," he said, pressing it into my hands. I know this isn't the ideal setting for business discussions, but I wanted you to have it tonight. My team has been working on this for months. We believe a collaboration between our companies could be transformative for both of us, and more importantly for the sustainability initiatives we both care about. We would be truly honored to work with you, Ms. Carter. I accepted the folder with both hands, feeling its weight, understanding what it represented. This was not charity. This was not a favor. This was a recognition of everything I had built through years of silent, determined work, while my family dismissed me as worthless. Thank you, Mr. Harrison, I said, and for the first time that evening, I allowed myself a small, genuine smile. I'll review it carefully. I turned then and looked directly at my father, the man who had pointed at me in front of everyone and called me poor, the man who had used me as a prop to make himself seem relatable, the man who had never once in 32 years expressed pride in anything I had accomplished. What I saw in his eyes was something I had never witnessed before: fear. He finally understood. The daughter he had belittled in front of his boss, the child he had dismissed and ignored and used as a contrast to highlight Victoria's supposed superiority, was more powerful than he could ever hope to be. His career, his reputation, his desperate social climbing, all of it depended on the goodwill of people who were now treating his rejected daughter like royalty. For one beautiful moment, standing there with that elegant folder in my hands and the respect of everyone my parents had ever wanted to impress, I thought the worst was over. I thought perhaps this public vindication would be enough, that we could move forward with some new understanding that the power shift might create space for healing. I was wrong, because what happened next would finally break something inside me. The guests departed slowly, lingering to exchange final pleasantries and make promises to connect in the new year. I watched Mr. Harrison leave with a warm handshake and a reminder to call his office after the holidays. The hospital director pressed her card into my palm with genuine warmth. The university dean spoke enthusiastically about future collaborations. One by one, the VIP guests who had witnessed my father's humiliation and my unexpected vindication filtered out into the snowy night, leaving behind empty champagne glasses and a house full of tension waiting to explode. I should have left with them. Every instinct told me to gather my children and slip away while the polite veneer of hospitality still held. But Emma and Lucas had fallen asleep on a couch in the back room, exhausted from the long evening, and I made the fatal mistake of waiting for a quieter moment to wake them. That moment never came. The last guest had barely cleared the driveway when my mother's hand clamped around my arm and yanked me toward the kitchen. My father followed close behind, his face purple with barely contained rage. Victoria trailed after them, arms crossed, her expression a mixture of fury and vindication, as though she had been waiting all evening for this private reckoning. The kitchen door swung shut, sealing us in together. "How dare you? How dare!" My mother's voice was low and venomous, more frightening than if she had screamed. "How dare you embarrass us in front of everyone we know, in front of your father's colleagues, in front of people we've spent years cultivating relationships with?" I stared at her in disbelief. "Embarrass you? I didn't do anything. Mr. Harrison recognized me. That's not something I planned." "Don't play innocent," my father snarled, stepping closer. His breath smelled of whiskey, and his eyes burned with a hatred I had seen glimpses of my entire life, but never this naked, this unrestrained. "You planned this whole thing. Showing up here pretending to be nobody, waiting for the perfect moment to make fools of us. You wanted to humiliate me in front of my boss. You wanted to destroy everything I've built." "That's not true. I came because you invited me. I wore simple clothes because Mother told me not to draw attention. I stood in the corner like I was asked. I did everything you wanted, and somehow I'm still the villain." "You stole Victoria's night." My mother's composure finally cracked, her voice rising to a shriek. "Tonight was supposed to be about her engagement announcement. Richard was going to propose after dinner. It was going to be beautiful and perfect, and you ruined it with your little performance." I looked at Victoria, who had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. An engagement. Another milestone that would have been celebrated with champagne and tears of joy, another moment where my sister would be crowned the family's golden child. And somehow my mere existence had ruined it. "I didn't know about any engagement," I said quietly. "No one told me." "Because no one wanted you here in the first place," my father bellowed. "You show up uninvited, you bring those children, you parade around acting like you belong with decent people, and then you pull this stunt to make yourself look important." "You're pathetic, Melissa. You've always been pathetic." Something inside me finally snapped. 32 years of silence, of acceptance, of turning the other cheek while they slapped me again and again. I had endured so much, forgiven so much, sacrificed so much. And for what? "I saved your house." I heard myself say, my voice steady, despite the trembling in my hands. 3 years ago, $26,000. The roof, the taxes, everything. That was me, not Victoria, me. The kitchen went silent. My mother recovered first, her lip curling with contempt. "Is that what this is about? You want credit? You want a medal for doing what any daughter should do? Victoria is the pride of this family. You're just the leftover we got stuck with." My father moved toward me, and for a terrifying moment I thought he might actually strike me. Instead, he grabbed my arm and began dragging me toward the back door. "Get out of my house," he growled. "Get out and don't come back. And don't bring those worthless children here again. They're as much of a disappointment as you are." "They're your grandchildren," I gasped, struggling against his grip. "They're nothing to me." He flung open the door, letting the freezing December air rush in. "Just like you." My mother appeared beside him, blocking any retreat back into the house. Her face was a mask of cold satisfaction as she leaned close and whispered words that would echo in my nightmares for years to come. "You were never really my daughter." I stumbled onto the back porch, catching myself on the railing. Behind me, I heard Victoria calling for Emma and Lucas to be brought out. Within moments, my children appeared in the doorway, coatless and confused, herded out by my sister like unwanted animals being expelled from the premises. "Mommy!" Emma's voice was small and frightened. She ran to me, her small body shivering in the bitter cold. "Mommy! What's happening? Why is everyone so angry?" Lucas followed, tears already streaming down his round cheeks, too young to understand, but old enough to feel the hatred radiating from the adults who should have loved him unconditionally. I knelt down and pulled them both close, trying to shield their small bodies from the wind with my own. Emma looked up at me, her eyes searching my face for an explanation I didn't have. "Mommy," she whispered, "why does Grandma hate us?" I had no answer. There was no answer that would make sense to an 8-year-old, no explanation that could soften the cruelty of what she had just witnessed. I simply held her tighter and felt my heart shatter into pieces too small to ever fully reassemble. The front door slammed shut with terrible finality. I looked through the window and saw my family walking back toward the living room, my mother already laughing at something Victoria said, my father pouring himself another drink, as though nothing significant had occurred. They had expelled us from their warmth and already moved on, returning to their comfortable lives without a backward glance. Snow began to fall, soft white flakes settling on my children's hair, on their bare arms, on the tears freezing on Lucas's cheeks. I removed my own coat and wrapped it around both of them, pulling them against my body to share whatever warmth I had left. "Are we going home, Mommy?" Lucas asked through chattering teeth. I stood slowly, lifting him into my arms while keeping Emma pressed close to my side. I looked one last time at the beautiful mansion, at the warm, golden light spilling from windows that had never truly welcomed me, at the family inside, who had finally revealed the full depth of their contempt. "Yes, baby," I said, my voice steady despite the tears freezing on my own cheeks. "We're going to our real home." We walked together down that long frozen driveway, 3 figures huddled against the cold, leaving behind 32 years of desperate hoping. And standing there in the snow, something inside me shifted permanently. The daughter who always forgave died in that driveway. The woman who always stayed silent froze to death beside her. The girl who kept hoping for love that would never come finally stopped breathing. Someone new took their place. That night I made a decision. No more silence. No more sacrifice. They wanted a war. They would get one. The drive home that Christmas Eve remains a blur of frozen tears and numb determination. Emma and Lucas fell asleep in the back seat within minutes, exhausted by confusion and cold, while I gripped the steering wheel and forced myself to focus on the icy roads ahead. When we finally reached our house, I carried them inside one at a time, tucked them into their warm beds, and sat alone in the darkness of my living room until dawn crept through the curtains. Christmas Day passed in a haze. I went through the motions for my children, watching them open presents with as much enthusiasm as I could muster, cooking the dinner I had planned, playing the holiday music they loved. But inside, something had fundamentally changed. The woman who had spent her entire life hoping for acceptance was gone. In her place sat someone harder, clearer, more resolved. On December 26th, after Emma and Lucas had settled into the comfortable rhythm of holiday break, I opened my laptop at the kitchen table and began the work that would change everything. I had maintained meticulous financial records my entire adult life, a habit born from years of having nothing and knowing exactly what it cost to survive. Now I used those records to trace every dollar I had ever sent in my family's direction, every payment I had made on their behalf, every invisible act of support they had never acknowledged. The numbers accumulated on my screen like an indictment. $26,000 for the roof repair and property tax crisis 3 years ago. But that was only the beginning. I had been paying a portion of their electricity bills for 4 years, ever since I noticed, during a rare visit, that they were keeping the house uncomfortably cold to save money. I had set up an automatic payment through a third-party service, instructing them to list it as a utility company credit so my parents would never know the truth. That added up to over $8,000. Then there was the credit card. 5 years ago, my father had called me in what I now recognized as a rare moment of desperation, claiming he needed me to co-sign a credit card application for emergency purposes only. I had agreed stupidly, believing it would never be used. The current balance showed $18,000 in charges, mostly from department stores and restaurants I had never visited. They had maxed it out within 2 years and made only minimum payments, since damaging my credit score in the process. Property taxes I had quietly paid 3 additional times when notices arrived at my door, forwarded by some bureaucratic error that I never corrected because it allowed me to keep saving them without their knowledge. Another $12,000. Small payments here and there. A medical bill I intercepted and paid anonymously. Car repairs I funded through a mechanic who owed me a favor. Groceries delivered during a particularly harsh winter, when I worried they couldn't afford to heat the house and feed themselves simultaneously. The total stared back at me from the spreadsheet I had created: $63,427 over 5 years. $63,000. More than many people earn in a year. Given freely, secretly, without expectation of recognition to parents who had thrown me and my children into the snow on Christmas Eve and told me I was never really their daughter. Not a single thank you. Not once. I sat with that number for a long time, feeling its weight settle into my bones. Then I began making phone calls. The utility company was first. I explained calmly that I needed to remove my payment information from the account and discontinue the automatic credits. The representative processed my request without question. Within billing cycles, my parents would see their electricity costs suddenly double, and they would have no idea why. Next, I called the bank that held the credit card. I informed them that I wished to remove myself as a co-signer, understanding that this would likely result in the account being frozen or closed due to insufficient primary credit. The banker warned me that my parents would be notified and that any outstanding balance would become immediately due. I told her I understood and authorized the change. The property tax office required a written request, which I typed and printed and signed with steady hands. I was removing myself from the automatic notification system and discontinuing all third-party payments on the account. Any future taxes would be my parents' responsibility entirely. One by one, I dismantled the invisible infrastructure of support that had kept my family financially stable for years. Each phone call, each email, each formal request was calm and methodical. I was not stealing anything. I was not breaking any laws. I was simply stopping my charity, withdrawing my gifts, removing my safety net from beneath people who had never known it existed. My hands shook slightly as I worked, but not from guilt. The trembling came from something else entirely, something that felt foreign after so many years of quiet submission. Liberation. The strange, terrifying, exhilarating sensation of finally saying no. Within days, my parents would receive notifications, credit accounts frozen, utility bills doubled, tax notices arriving with no mysterious payments already applied. They would scramble to understand what had happened, never suspecting that their rejected daughter had been the silent foundation keeping their comfortable life from collapsing. "Mommy!" I looked up to find Emma standing in the kitchen doorway, her favorite stuffed rabbit clutched against her chest. Her eyes were worried as she studied my face. "Are you okay?" she asked. "You look sad." I closed my laptop and opened my arms. She came to me immediately, climbing into my lap despite being almost too big for such things, and I held her close, breathing in the sweet scent of her hair. "Mommy is just cleaning up some old things," I said softly. "Nothing for you to worry about." "Is it about Grandma and Grandpa?" The question pierced me. Children see more than we realize. "It's about making sure we take care of ourselves first," I said carefully. "Sometimes we give and give to people who don't appreciate it, and we have to learn when to stop." "Does that make sense?" Emma nodded slowly. "Like when Tommy kept taking my crayons and never said thank you, so I stopped sharing with him. Exactly like that, sweetheart." She hugged me tighter, and I realized something profound. I was not doing this for revenge, not entirely. I was doing it so my daughter would never learn that love meant being a doormat. So my son would never believe that family had the right to exploit and discard him. I was breaking a cycle that could have poisoned another generation, teaching my children through action that boundaries were not cruelty, that protecting yourself was not selfishness. The withdrawal of money was really a withdrawal from a toxic relationship. It was the first step toward freedom. Emma eventually wandered off to play with her brother, and I returned to my laptop intending to close the files and step away from the painful accounting of my own exploitation. But something caught my eye. A transaction I didn't recognize. A credit inquiry I had never authorized. A document attached to an old account that made no sense. I clicked deeper, following the trail of numbers and dates, and what I found made my stomach turn. I had discovered something I was never supposed to see. Something that would change everything. The transaction that caught my eye was dated 10 years ago, buried in a credit report I had pulled as part of my financial review. I almost scrolled past it, assuming it was simply an old record from my early professional days. But the account number didn't match anything I recognized, and the inquiry date corresponded to a time when I had been deliberately avoiding any new credit applications. I clicked on the details and felt the floor shift beneath me. Someone had opened a credit card in my name when I was 22 years old, using my social security number and an address I had never lived at. The credit limit was $8,000, and it had been maxed out within 6 months. No payments were ever made. The account had been sent to collections and eventually written off as bad debt, leaving a devastating mark on my credit history. My fingers trembled as I dug deeper. There was another credit card opened 3 months after the first, this one with a $5,000 limit. Same pattern. Maxed out, no payments sent to collections. And beneath that, a personal loan for $7,000 taken from a predatory lender who charged astronomical interest rates. Also defaulted. Also destroyed. $20,000 in debt that I had never incurred, attached to accounts I had never opened, destroying a credit score I had worked desperately to build. I stared at the screen for a long time, my mind racing through the implications. This explained everything. When I had tried to get a small business loan to launch my consulting firm, banks had treated me with suspicion despite my solid income and savings. My applications were rejected repeatedly, forcing me to bootstrap my company with personal funds and delay expansion for years. I had assumed I was being discriminated against for being young, for being female, for being a single mother. I had blamed myself for not being more established, more credentialed, more impressive. But it wasn't me at all. It was this: $20,000 in fraudulent debt dragging down my credit score, flagging me as a risk to every financial institution I approached. My stomach churned as I examined the application details more closely. The address listed was my parents' house. The phone number was their landline. The employer listed was the company where I had taken my first job after college, information that would only have been known to people close to me. I knew immediately who had done this. There was no other possibility. My mind traveled back to a conversation I had almost forgotten. I was 22, fresh out of college, excited about my new job, and eager to establish myself as a responsible adult. My mother had called me one evening, her voice unusually warm, asking if I could provide my Social Security number for some family insurance paperwork. "Your father is updating our policies," she had explained, "and we want to include you as a beneficiary. We need your information for the forms." I had given it to her without hesitation. She was my mother. Why would I question her? A month later, my father had called with a similar request. Something about a joint emergency fund, a family safety net that required everyone's information to establish. I had provided my details again, pleased that they were including me in family financial planning for the first time. I interpreted their requests as signs that they were finally accepting me, finally treating me as a real member of the family. I was 22 years old and still pathetically hoping to earn their love. They used that hope to steal my identity and fund their lifestyle while systematically destroying my financial future. Every struggle of my early career crystallized into terrible clarity. The loan rejections that forced me to work 3 jobs instead of investing in my business. The apartment applications that required extra deposits because of my problematic credit history. The insurance rates that seemed inexplicably high. The constant grinding difficulty of building something from nothing while invisible weights dragged me down. They hadn't just neglected me. They hadn't just emotionally abused me. They had actively, deliberately sabotaged me. They had stolen my identity, ruined my credit, and then had the audacity to call me the unsuccessful daughter, the poor one, the family embarrassment. They created the obstacles that made my success harder to achieve, and then mocked me for not achieving it faster. The depth of the betrayal was almost incomprehensible. I needed professional confirmation. I needed to know exactly what this meant legally before I decided how to proceed. The next morning, after dropping Emma and Lucas at a holiday playdate, I called Patricia Hendricks, an attorney I had worked with on business contracts, who I knew also handled financial fraud cases. She reviewed the documents I sent over within hours and called me back with a grim assessment. "Melissa, this is textbook identity theft, federal identity theft, specifically because it involves financial institutions that operate across state lines. If you can prove your parents opened these accounts, and based on what you've shown me, that proof seems clear they could face serious criminal charges. We're talking 2 to 20 years in federal prison, depending on the circumstances and the prosecutor." I sat in silence, absorbing her words. "You have documentation showing the accounts were opened using your personal information without your authorization," Patricia continued. "The addresses and phone numbers trace back to your parents' residence. The timing corresponds to when you provided your Social Security number for supposed family paperwork. Any competent prosecutor could build a case with this evidence." "What are my options?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "You can file a police report and pursue criminal charges. You can also sue them civilly for damages, which could include the financial harm to your credit, lost business opportunities, emotional distress. Or you can use this information as leverage in other negotiations, keeping the threat of legal action as a tool rather than deploying it immediately." Leverage. The word resonated in my mind. I didn't want my parents in prison. Despite everything they had done, despite the cruelty and betrayal and theft, some part of me still recoiled from the idea of seeing them behind bars. They were in their 60s now. A federal conviction would likely mean they would die incarcerated. But I also couldn't let this go unanswered. They had stolen from me in the most intimate way possible, using my trust as a weapon against my future. They had made my already difficult journey exponentially harder and then blamed me for not traveling it fast enough. I thanked Patricia and asked her to prepare a comprehensive file documenting everything, not for immediate action but for readiness. When the time came, I wanted every piece of evidence organized, verified, and devastating. As I ended the call, I realized something had shifted inside me again. The discovery on Christmas Eve had killed the hopeful daughter. This discovery killed any remaining belief that my parents' cruelty had limits. They weren't just emotionally abusive, they were criminals who had chosen to victimize their own child. I thought I had found the worst of it. I thought identity theft was the deepest betrayal they were capable of. But my sister's betrayal cut even deeper. The identity theft had already shattered something fundamental in my understanding of my parents. I had known they were cruel. I had known they were selfish. But I had never imagined they were capable of calculated financial crime against their own daughter. That revelation alone would have been enough to justify everything I was planning. But fate, it seemed, was not finished showing me the full extent of my family's betrayal. On December 28th, while continuing my systematic review of every financial account I had ever opened, I noticed something peculiar in my secondary savings account. This was a fund I rarely checked, an automatic deposit account where a small percentage of my company profits were transferred each month for emergency reserves. I had set it up years ago and largely forgotten about it, trusting the automated systems to handle the deposits while I focused on running my business. A fraud alert notification caught my attention. The bank's security system had flagged unusual activity and sent a warning that I had apparently missed weeks earlier, buried in the avalanche of holiday emails. I clicked through to examine the details, expecting perhaps a minor error or a duplicate charge that needed correction. What I found instead made my blood run cold. Small transfers had been leaving my account for years. $200 here, $500 there, $300 on one date, $400 on another. The amounts were irregular enough to avoid triggering immediate fraud detection, small enough to escape notice in an account I rarely monitored closely. They had been occurring steadily for more than 3 years. I scrolled through page after page of transactions, watching the pattern emerge with sickening clarity. The transfers went to a single external account, always the same routing number, always the same destination. When I added up the total amount drained over 37 months, the number stared back at me like an accusation. $15,462, gone. My hands shook as I traced the receiving account information. The bank's customer service line connected me with a representative who, after verifying my identity and explaining that I was investigating potential fraud, was able to confirm the account holder's name, Victoria Renee Carter, my sister. I sat in absolute stillness for several minutes, staring at the name on my screen, unable to process what I was seeing. Victoria had been stealing from me. Not once, not accidentally, not through some misunderstanding. Systematically, deliberately, over the course of 3 years, she had been draining my savings account while publicly mocking me as the poor one, the unsuccessful sister, the family embarrassment. How had she accessed my account? The answer came almost immediately. My parents had my social security number, my banking information, my personal details. They had already proven willing to use that information for fraud. They must have shared it with Victoria. Or perhaps she had simply helped herself to documents they kept carelessly around the house. Access to one set of credentials often meant access to everything else. I pulled up Victoria's Instagram account, something I rarely did, because her performative lifestyle had always felt like a deliberate contrast to my quiet existence. Now I examined her posts with different eyes, scrolling back through 3 years of carefully curated content. There was Victoria in the Maldives, lounging on a pristine beach, captioning the photo with something about spontaneous getaways. I cross-referenced the date with my bank records. 3 days before that post, $800 had been transferred from my account to hers. There was Victoria showing off a designer handbag, claiming she had treated herself after a hard week. The transfer corresponding to that date was $600. A spa weekend, a new wardrobe, a sunset dinner at a rooftop restaurant, a girls' trip to Miami. Every glamorous moment, every luxury experience, every piece of her carefully constructed influencer image corresponded to money stolen from my savings. Her entire lifestyle was built on theft. The daughter my parents celebrated as successful, independent, and glamorous was actually a parasite feeding on the sister she openly despised. She had stood in that Christmas party wearing designer clothes and smirking at my simple dress, and every thread of her expensive outfit had been purchased with my money. The hypocrisy was almost too enormous to comprehend. They had all called me poor. They had all mocked my modest life, my practical choices, my apparent inability to achieve the visible markers of success that Victoria displayed so proudly. And the entire time, Victoria's markers of success were funded by draining my accounts in amounts small enough to escape notice. I was their ATM, their scapegoat, their punching bag, and their piggy bank simultaneously. For the first time since Christmas Eve, I cried. The tears came suddenly and violently, racking my body with sobs I couldn't control. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open to the evidence of my sister's theft, and wept like I hadn't wept since I was 12 years old, slapped for buying her a bracelet with my lunch money savings. But these tears weren't from sadness. They came from the sheer crushing weight of accumulated betrayal. My parents had stolen my identity and sabotaged my career. My sister had stolen my money and used it to build a life that mocked my supposed poverty. My entire family had treated me as worthless while literally surviving off my success. They had convinced the world I was a failure while feeding on my achievements like parasites on a host. The crying lasted perhaps 15 minutes. When it finally subsided, I sat in the quiet kitchen with swollen eyes and a strange new feeling in my chest. The grief had burned through me and left something harder in its place, something colder, something that no longer felt any obligation to show mercy. I pulled my laptop closer and began the methodical work of documentation. Every transfer screenshotted, every date recorded, every correlation between Victoria's Instagram posts and my depleted savings cataloged and saved. I created backup files and stored them in multiple secure locations. I printed hard copies and filed them in a locked drawer. Victoria had built her castle on stolen sand. Her glamorous image, her influencer persona, her position as the successful daughter was entirely fraudulent. And I was going to wash it all away. But as thorough as I tried to be, as deep as I dug into the records of my own exploitation, there was one more discovery waiting for me. The biggest one of all. Hidden in paperwork I had never thought to question, buried in documents I had assumed were straightforward family business. The truth about my parents' house and about the money I had paid to save it. The discovery of Victoria's theft had transformed my grief into something sharper, more focused. I was no longer drowning in sadness. I was building a case. And as I gathered documents to send to my attorney, organizing years of financial records into coherent evidence of my family's crimes, I stumbled upon something that would shift the entire balance of power. The paperwork was buried in a folder I had labeled House Crisis 2021, filed and forgotten after I had anonymously saved my parents from foreclosure 3 years earlier. At the time, I had simply been grateful to resolve the emergency quickly and quietly. I had transferred the money, instructed my accountant to handle the details, and moved on with my life, never expecting recognition, and certainly never receiving it. Now, reviewing the documents with fresh eyes and a mind attuned to betrayal, I noticed something I had overlooked entirely. The payment structure was not what I had assumed. When the original bank had been preparing to foreclose on my parents' property, I had asked my accountant, Robert Chen, to handle the transaction in a way that would keep my involvement anonymous. I assumed he had simply paid off the outstanding debt and closed the matter. What I had never realized was that Robert, always looking for ways to maximize tax benefits and protect my interests, had structured the transaction differently. Instead of paying off the mortgage as a gift, Robert had arranged for me to purchase the outstanding debt from the bank at a negotiated discount. This was apparently common practice in distressed mortgage situations, allowing investors to acquire debt at below-market rates, while the bank avoided the costly foreclosure process. At the time, Robert had explained something about tax advantages and asset positioning, but I had been too overwhelmed with running my business and raising two small children to pay close attention to the details. The details, it turned out, were everything. I read through the documents 3 times, my heart pounding harder with each pass. The language was dense with legal terminology, but certain phrases stood out with unmistakable clarity. Transfer of mortgage note. Assignment of lien. Successor lien holder. According to these papers, I had not merely saved my parents' house, I had become their mortgage holder. I owned their debt. My hands trembled as I reached for my phone and called Patricia Hendricks, the attorney who had already helped me understand the identity theft implications. When her assistant said she was in a meeting, I insisted it was urgent. 5 minutes later, Patricia was on the line. "I need you to look at some documents," I said, my voice strained. "I think I may own my parents' mortgage, but I need someone to confirm what I'm reading." I scanned and emailed the paperwork while we stayed connected. Patricia was silent for several minutes as she reviewed the files. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a note of professional admiration that surprised me. "Melissa, your accountant is either a genius or the luckiest man in financial planning. He structured this perfectly. When you paid off the crisis amount 3 years ago, you didn't just clear their debt. You purchased the mortgage note from the distressed bank. You are the lien holder on that property. Your parents have been living in a house where they owe the debt to you." I gripped the phone tighter. "What does that mean practically?" "It means they should have been making mortgage payments to you for the past 3 years. Whatever their original payment schedule was, it transferred along with the note. Based on these documents, they owe you approximately 36 months of payments, plus interest, plus whatever penalties might apply for non-payment." She paused, and I heard papers shuffling on her end. "If they haven't made any payments, which I'm assuming they haven't, since you didn't even know you held the note, you have every legal right to initiate foreclosure proceedings." The word foreclosure hung in the air between us. I could take their house. You could begin the process that might result in the sale of their house, yes. The exact timeline and procedure would depend on state law, and there would be required notice periods and opportunities for them to cure the default. But fundamentally, if you hold the mortgage and they haven't paid, you have remedies available, significant remedies. I ended the call after arranging for Patricia to conduct a full review of the documents and advise me on next steps. Then I sat in the growing darkness of my living room, surrounded by the evidence of my family's crimes and the paperwork that granted me power I had never sought. The irony was almost too perfect to believe. My parents had stood in that mansion on Christmas Eve, surrounded by VIP guests and expensive decorations, and called me the poor one. They had pointed at me in front of the most powerful man in the room and mocked my inability to afford a proper dress. They had made me the punchline of their cruel joke, the embarrassing daughter who couldn't compete with Victoria's glamorous success. And the entire time they were living under a roof that existed only because of me. Every mortgage payment they should have been making had gone unpaid. Every month they continued to live in comfort, they sank deeper into debt they owed to the daughter they despised. The mansion where they threw their elaborate parties, where they bragged about Victoria's accomplishments, where they ultimately threw me and my children into the freezing snow. All of it was secured by my money, my intervention, my invisible love. They had mocked my children in rooms that would have been repossessed without my help. They had slammed the door on us from a house they would have lost years ago. They had celebrated their golden daughter in a home that stood only because their rejected daughter had saved it. And they had no idea. For 3 years they had lived in ignorance of the truth. They believed the house was theirs, that their crisis had been mysteriously resolved by good fortune, or perhaps Victoria's imaginary sacrifice. They had never questioned where their salvation came from, never wondered who had intervened, never suspected that the daughter they considered worthless held the keys to their kingdom. I didn't know yet if I would use this power. The thought of actually foreclosing on my parents, of initiating legal proceedings that could leave them homeless, still felt extreme despite everything they had done. Some part of me still recoiled from causing them direct harm, even after the Christmas Eve betrayal, even after discovering the identity theft and Victoria's systematic theft. But for the first time in my life, the balance had shifted completely. I was no longer the victim begging for scraps of love from people incapable of giving it. I was no longer the invisible daughter hoping to be noticed, valued, acknowledged. I held power they couldn't imagine, documented evidence of their crimes and legal leverage over the very roof above their heads. They had wanted me to be nothing. They had trained me to be silent. They had convinced themselves I was weak, worthless, disposable. They were about to discover how wrong they had been. I had the weapon. Now I needed to decide, would I use it? The question haunted me through the final days of December and into the first week of January. I had assembled evidence of identity theft, documented Victoria's systematic embezzlement, and discovered I held legal power over my parents' home. The weapons were arranged before me like pieces on a chessboard, each one capable of delivering devastating damage. But having power and using it were two different things, and I needed guidance from someone who could see the situation without the fog of emotion that clouded my own judgment. Patricia Hendricks met me at her downtown office on a gray January morning, the holiday decorations already stripped from the building lobby, the world returning to its ordinary rhythms while my life remained in extraordinary upheaval. Her firm occupied the 23rd floor of a glass tower, and her corner office offered views of the city that reminded me how far I had come from the girl who couldn't afford lunch money. Patricia was in her 50s, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, with a reputation for handling complex family disputes and financial fraud cases with surgical precision. I had chosen her specifically because she was known for being both brilliant and practical, capable of seeing legal options without losing sight of human consequences. I had sent her all the documentation in advance, and she had clearly reviewed everything thoroughly. The folders sat arranged on her desk, tabbed and annotated, representing the complete archive of my family's betrayal. "Let me make sure I understand the full picture." Patricia began, her voice calm and professional. "Your parents committed identity theft by opening credit accounts in your name without authorization, resulting in approximately $20,000 in fraudulent debt that damaged your credit for years. Your sister has been embezzling from your savings account, stealing over $15,000 over 3 years to fund her lifestyle. And you hold the mortgage note on your parents' property, meaning they owe you 3 years of unpaid payments plus interest and penalties." I nodded, feeling the weight of each crime summarized so clinically. Patricia removed her reading glasses and looked at me directly. "Melissa, I want to be completely honest with you. You could destroy them, entirely and legally. The identity theft alone is a federal crime. We're talking potential prison sentences of 2 to 20 years depending on how the prosecutor frames the charges. Your parents are in their 60s. A federal conviction could effectively be a life sentence." And the words landed heavily in the quiet office. "The financial fraud involving your sister could result in civil judgments that would bankrupt her completely," Patricia continued. "She has no real assets, no legitimate income, nothing to protect. A lawsuit would expose her entire fabricated lifestyle and leave her with debt she could never repay." She paused, letting me absorb the implications before moving to the final piece. "And the foreclosure. This is where your position is strongest because it requires no criminal prosecution, no civil lawsuit, no cooperation from authorities. You hold the mortgage note. They haven't paid in 3 years. You send a notice of default. They have 90 days to pay the full outstanding balance, and when they can't, you proceed with foreclosure. The house goes to auction." "How much would they owe?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Patricia consulted her notes. "The original debt you purchased was approximately $120,000. 3 years of missed payments at their original terms, plus accumulated interest, plus standard penalties for default. By my calculation, the outstanding balance is now approximately $180,000. $180,000. A sum my parents could never pay. A sum that would strip them of everything. If they can't pay, Patricia said, and based on every financial record I've reviewed, they absolutely cannot. The foreclosure proceeds. The house goes to auction. Whatever it sells for goes first to satisfy your debt. Given property values in that area, you would likely recover your full amount. But your parents would be left with nothing or close to it. They would lose their home, their equity, everything they've built their identity around. She sat back in her chair and studied my face. It's a legal, clean, devastating option. You would be entirely within your rights. No court would question it. No one could accuse you of doing anything improper. I sat with her words for a long moment, feeling the power she was describing settle around me like a cloak I had never asked to wear. I thought about my parents standing in their mansion on Christmas Eve, surrounded by expensive decorations and important guests. I thought about my father pointing at me and calling me poor. I thought about my mother hissing that I was never really her daughter. I thought about my children shivering in the snow while my family returned to their warm living room and continued their party. They deserved consequences. For the first time in their lives, they deserved to face real consequences for their actions. But something in me hesitated. I don't want to destroy them, I heard myself say, surprised by the truth in my own words. I know that probably sounds weak after everything they've done, but I didn't build my life around revenge. I built it around escaping them. I just want them to understand what they did. I want them to face consequences, real consequences for the first time in their lives. Not because I want to watch them suffer, but because they need to learn that actions have results. Patricia nodded slowly, and I saw something like respect in her expression. That's actually a healthier approach than many clients in your position take, and it's strategically sound. If you go in with maximum force immediately, you lose options. If you proceed carefully documenting everything, giving them chances to make things right, you maintain control while building an even stronger position. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a more conversational tone. Here's what I recommend. We send the notice of default on the mortgage. That's your right as the lien holder, and it's the least aggressive of your options. We give them 90 days to respond. We see how they react. If they want to negotiate in good faith, acknowledge their debts, make amends, we can work with that. If they refuse, deny attack, we document their behavior and let the natural consequences unfold. And the identity theft, the embezzlement. We hold those in reserve, for now. They're leverage. If your family responds to the foreclosure notice with hostility, if they try to attack you publicly or legally, we have documented evidence of federal crimes we can deploy. But we don't have to lead with nuclear weapons. I considered her words carefully. The approach felt right. It gave my family a chance to do something they had never done, take responsibility. And if they refused, the consequences would be their own choice, not my revenge. We proceed carefully, I agreed. We give them chances, and if they refuse to take them, we let the consequences unfold naturally. Patricia began outlining the specific steps and timeline, explaining the legal notices that would need to be prepared, the documentation that would accompany each communication, the response windows that state law required. I listened carefully, taking notes, preparing myself for the battle ahead. I thought I was prepared for their reaction. I had imagined anger denial, perhaps desperate attempts at manipulation. I had steeled myself for harsh words and false accusations, but I wasn't prepared for what actually happened, not even close. The fallout began exactly 8 days after Christmas, when the automated systems I had carefully dismantled finally triggered notifications to their intended recipients. I was sitting at my kitchen table reviewing contracts for a new client when my phone rang with a number I had learned to dread seeing on my screen. My mother. I answered and immediately activated the recording function Patricia had taught me to use. In our state, only one party needed to consent to recording a phone conversation, and that party was me. "Melissa, darling." My mother's voice dripped with a sweetness so artificial it made my stomach turn. This was her manipulation voice, the tone she used when she wanted something, the sugar coating that always preceded demands. I just received the strangest call from the electric company. They said something about a payment arrangement being canceled. There must be some mistake. Can you look into it? I took a slow breath before responding. There's no mistake, Mother. I canceled the arrangement. A pause. I could almost hear her recalculating shifting strategies. Well, you'll need to fix it. Call them back and reinstate whatever you had set up. No. The single word hung in the air between us. I had never said no to my mother so directly, so simply, without explanation or apology. Excuse me. Her sweet tone began to curdle. I'm no longer covering your expenses. The electricity, the other payments, I've been making all of it. I've canceled everything. You'll need to handle your own bills from now on. The transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. The sugary voice vanished, replaced by something raw and vicious that I had heard in glimpses throughout my childhood, but never directed at me with such undisguised fury. You ungrateful little wretch. After everything we did for you, we raised you. We fed you. We put a roof over your head for 18 years. Everything you have, everything you've become is because of us. You owe us. I held the phone slightly away from my ear as she screamed, letting her words pour into the recording. Patricia had told me this might happen, that removing financial support often triggered explosive reactions from people who had come to feel entitled to it. She had advised me to let them talk to capture their true feelings without the mask of civility they usually maintained. My mother was certainly talking now. You think you're so special, don't you? With your little company and your important friends. You're nothing. You've always been nothing. We should have given you up for adoption when we had the chance. At least then we wouldn't have to deal with your jealousy and your petty revenge. She continued for nearly 10 minutes, cycling through accusations, threats, and increasingly unhinged claims about my character and motivations. I said almost nothing, offering only occasional neutral responses to keep her talking. By the time she finally ran out of venom and hung up on me, I had a recording that captured exactly who my mother really was beneath her careful public persona. Not a loving parent disappointed by a wayward child. A parasite enraged that her host had finally fought back. Victoria's attack came through text messages beginning that same evening and escalating over the following days. Unlike our mother's volcanic eruption, Victoria's approach was more calculated, a strategic campaign of intimidation and manipulation delivered in bursts throughout the day. The first message arrived at 9 in the evening. I heard what you did to Mom and Dad. You're going to regret this. I didn't respond. More messages followed. You think you're better than us? You're pathetic. You've always been pathetic. I know people, important people. I'll tell everyone what a horrible person you really are. You're just jealous of me. You always have been. That's what this is really about. The messages kept coming, each one more desperate and threatening than the last. Victoria accused me of trying to destroy the family. She claimed I was mentally unstable. She threatened to contact my business partners and tell them lies about my character. She said she would launch a social media campaign exposing my true nature to the world. I saved every single message, screenshotting each one and adding it to the growing folder of evidence Patricia had instructed me to maintain. Victoria had no idea that she was building my case with every hateful word. She didn't realize that any public battle would expose her own theft, that the financial records I possessed would reveal exactly who had been stealing from whom. She thought she was intimidating me. She was actually digging her own grave. You're making a huge mistake, she wrote on the third day. Mom and Dad gave you everything, and this is how you repay them. You deserve whatever's coming to you. I read that message several times, marveling at her capacity for delusion. Mom and Dad gave me everything. The words would have been laughable if they weren't so painfully detached from reality. What had they given me? Hand-me-down clothes while Victoria wore new designer outfits. Criticism while she received praise. Chores while she received leisure. They had given me a childhood of neglect and exploitation, and Victoria had the audacity to claim they had given me everything. My father's contribution to the family assault came in the form of a single text message delivered on the 4th day of their campaign. "If you don't fix this, you're dead to me." I stared at those 8 words for a very long time, sitting alone in my living room after the children had gone to bed. Outside, January wind rattled the windows, and I pulled a blanket tighter around my shoulders as I processed what he had written. "If you don't fix this, you're dead to me." The threat was meant to wound, to frighten, to pressure me into submission through fear of losing my father's love. It might have worked once when I was young and desperate for his approval, when I still believed his love was something I could earn through sufficient sacrifice and obedience. But sitting there in the quiet darkness, I realized something that brought unexpected peace instead of pain. I was already dead to him. I had been dead to him my entire life. He had never seen me as a daughter to cherish. I was a disappointment to manage, a resource to exploit, a scapegoat to blame when things went wrong. His message didn't threaten to take away something I possessed. It simply acknowledged a reality that had always existed. The only difference was that I was no longer pretending otherwise. I did not respond to his message. I did not respond to any of them. There was nothing left to say to people who had revealed so completely the true nature of their feelings. Every word they had spoken and written over those 4 days proved that Patricia's cautious approach had been correct. They were not interested in reconciliation or accountability. They were interested only in restoring their access to my resources. The next communication they received would not come from me. It would come from my attorney, delivered by certified mail with return receipt requested. 3 days later, they received that letter, and nothing would ever be the same. The letter arrived at my parents' house on a Tuesday morning in the 3rd week of January. I know this because Patricia's office received the signed return receipt confirming delivery, and because my phone began ringing approximately 45 minutes later with a fury I could hear before I even answered. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me describe what that letter contained, because understanding its careful construction is essential to understanding what came next. Patricia had drafted the document with meticulous precision. It was titled Notice of Default and Intent to Foreclose, and addressed to my parents by their full legal names with their property address listed in formal legal description, including lot numbers and county records references. The language was dense with legal terminology, but absolutely clear in its meaning. The letter informed them that they were in default on their mortgage obligation. It specified the original debt amount, the accumulated missed payments over 36 months, the applicable interest rates, and the penalties that had accrued. The total outstanding balance was listed in bold $182,416. It further informed them that as the holder of the mortgage note, I was exercising my legal right to demand full payment of all outstanding obligations. They had 90 days from the date of receipt to remit the full amount. If payment was not received within that period, foreclosure proceedings would commence in accordance with state law. The letter contained no emotional language, no references to family relationships, childhood memories, or Christmas Eve betrayals. It did not mention identity theft, embezzlement, or decades of psychological abuse. It treated my parents exactly as they had always treated me, as a financial transaction, nothing more. Patricia had included her firm's contact information for any questions regarding the legal process. She had not included mine. I was done talking to them personally. From now on, all communication would flow through proper channels. My father's call came while I was preparing lunch for Emma and Lucas, the return receipt notification still fresh on my phone. I excused myself to my home office before answering, not wanting my children to overhear whatever was about to happen. "What is this?" My father's voice shook with a mixture of rage and something I had rarely heard from him, fear. "Some kind of joke? Some sick game you're playing?" "Hello, Dad." I kept my voice calm and professional, channeling the boardroom demeanor I had developed over years of high-stakes negotiations. "I assume you received the notice from my attorney." "Your attorney?" "What the hell is going on, Melissa? This letter says we owe you $180,000. It says you're going to take our house. The letter is accurate. You've been in default on your mortgage payments for 3 years. I'm simply exercising my legal rights as the debt holder. Debt holder? What are you talking about? We don't owe you anything. I explained in the same detached tone the letter had used how his mortgage crisis 3 years ago had been resolved. How my intervention had not been a gift, but a purchase of his debt. How every month since then, he should have been making payments to me rather than assuming the problem had magically disappeared. How his failure to make those payments had accumulated into the substantial sum now due. He sputtered and raged, cycling through denial, accusation, and threats. He called me ungrateful. He called me cruel. He demanded to know how I could do this to my own family. And then he said the words I had been waiting for. This is extortion. You're trying to extort money from your own parents. I'll call the police. I let a moment of silence hang between us before responding. No, Dad. Extortion is using your daughter's social security number to open credit cards without her knowledge or consent. Extortion is stealing her identity to fund your lifestyle while destroying her credit. This is just business. The silence on the other end was profound. I could almost hear him processing my words, realizing their implications, understanding that I knew about crimes he had assumed would stay buried forever. How did you... He started, then stopped. That was, we needed your mother said. Save your explanations for your own attorney, I said. You'll probably want to hire one. The notice explains the timeline. You have 90 days. I ended the call and sat alone in my office, surprised to find my hands were not trembling at all. I had expected to feel something more intense, guilt perhaps, or triumph, or the vindictive satisfaction of finally gaining the upper hand. Instead, I felt only a quiet resolution. I had done what needed to be done. The rest was up to them. Word began to spread through my parents' community over the following days. I don't know how the information leaked, whether my father told friends who told others, whether my mother's hysterical phone calls were overheard, or whether the simple fact of a legal notice arriving via certified mail triggered neighborhood gossip. Whatever the source, people began to talk. Some of what they said reached me through unexpected channels. Former neighbors who had watched me grow up, who had witnessed the preferential treatment Victoria received, who had heard my parents dismiss the other daughter at countless social gatherings, began reaching out. Emails arrived from addresses I didn't recognize. Facebook messages from people I hadn't spoken to in decades. Even a few handwritten letters forwarded through my company's public address. The messages were remarkably similar in tone. People remembered things I had assumed no one had noticed. The way my mother would introduce Victoria effusively while barely mentioning my name. The expensive gifts Victoria received while I wore obvious hand-me-downs. The subtle and not-so-subtle comments my parents made about their disappointing eldest daughter. I always thought there was something wrong with how they treated you, one former neighbor wrote. My husband used to say it wasn't our business, but I never forgot the look on your face at Victoria's 16th birthday party when your parents gave her a car and you got nothing. One letter stood out from the others. It came from Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman who had secretly called me 3 years ago to warn me about my parents' financial crisis. Her handwriting was shaky, but her words were clear. Dear Melissa, she wrote, I always knew you were the good one. From the time you were a little girl helping with groceries, checking on elderly neighbors, working so hard while your sister played. Your grandmother knew it too. She used to tell me that you were her diamond, her special girl who would shine when the time was right. She would be so proud of who you've become. Whatever happens with your family, please know that some of us have always seen you. I read that letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. Mrs. Patterson had known my grandmother. She remembered. All those years when I felt invisible, when I believed no one saw my struggles or my worth, someone had been watching. Someone had seen me. The isolation I had felt for 32 years began to crack, letting in light I had almost forgotten existed. But I wasn't the only one who wanted to help me, and the next call would change everything. Mrs. Patterson's letter had reminded me that I was not as alone as I had always believed. But what happened next proved that support could come from the most unexpected places, carrying revelations that would reshape my understanding of my own life. The call came on a Thursday afternoon in the fourth week of January. I was reviewing quarterly reports in my home office when my assistant forwarded an unusual message. Mr. Harrison was on the line calling from his personal number rather than through his corporate office, and he had specifically requested to speak with me directly rather than scheduling through normal channels. I accepted the call with some confusion, expecting perhaps a question about the partnership proposal that still sat in my desk drawer waiting for the chaos of my personal life to settle before I could give it proper attention. "Ms. Carter," he began, and something in his voice immediately told me this was not a business call. "I apologize for reaching out so informally, but there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you at that Christmas party, but the circumstances didn't allow for a private conversation." I waited, uncertain where this was heading. "I've heard whispers about your family situation," he continued. "I won't pretend to know the details, but I understand there's conflict. Serious conflict. And before things progress further, I need you to know why I approached you the way I did that night. Why I felt it was so important to acknowledge you publicly." He paused, and I heard him take a breath that seemed to carry the weight of years. 10 years ago, my daughter was a student at the state university. She was struggling with depression, something we didn't fully understand at the time. I was focused on building the company. Her mother was dealing with her own health issues, and somehow our daughter fell through the cracks of our attention. My heart began to beat faster, though I didn't yet understand why. One night in October, she went to the roof of her dormitory. She was going to jump. She had written letters, made her peace, climb to the top of that building, intending never to come down alive. His voice cracked slightly. And then a young woman she barely knew appeared on that rooftop. A 22-year-old intern who had noticed something was wrong, who had followed her up those stairs, who refused to leave. The memory surfaced, slowly rising from depths I had not visited in years. A cold October night. A rooftop. A girl whose name I couldn't remember sitting on a ledge with tears streaming down her face. "That young woman sat with my daughter for 4 hours, Mr. Harrison continued. "She talked to her, listened to her, convinced her that the world still held reasons to live. She stayed until my daughter finally agreed to come down, and then she walked her to the campus counseling center and waited until help arrived." I remembered now. The girl had been in one of my study groups, quiet and withdrawn in recent weeks. I had noticed her leaving our building that night with a strange expression, something final in her eyes, and without really thinking, I had followed her. I hadn't known who she was. I hadn't calculated the implications. I had simply seen someone in pain and done what felt necessary. "That young woman was you, Ms. Carter," Mr. Harrison said. "You saved my daughter's life. And you never told anyone. You never tried to contact me, never leveraged your connection to advance your career. My security team eventually figured out who you were, piecing together the story from campus records and my daughter's own account. But you never knew that I knew. You never asked for anything in return." I sat in stunned silence, my throat tight with emotion I couldn't name. "When your company started growing, I watched from a distance," he continued. "I wanted to help, but I also wanted to respect what you had done by not turning it into some kind of transaction. The $80 million contract we discussed at the party is not charity, Ms. Carter. Your work is genuinely exceptional, and my board approved that partnership on pure business merits. But I would be lying if I said I didn't feel I owed you a debt that money can never repay." "I barely remember that night," I finally managed to say. She was just a girl who needed someone to listen. Anyone would have done the same. "No," Mr. Harrison replied firmly. "Anyone would not have done the same. Most people would have walked past. Most people would have told themselves it wasn't their business. You climbed onto a rooftop in the dark and sat with a stranger for 4 hours because you saw someone suffering and couldn't look away. That's not ordinary, Ms. Carter. That's extraordinary." The tears came then, unexpected and overwhelming. I had spent my entire life being told I was worthless, the disappointing daughter, the embarrassment who couldn't compete with Victoria. And here was this powerful man telling me that something I had done without thought or calculation had mattered profoundly. "My daughter is married now," Mr. Harrison said, his own voice thick with emotion. "She has 2 children. She became a therapist specializing in adolescent mental health. Every life she saves, every young person she helps, traces back to that night when you refused to let her go. Your kindness echoed forward in ways you could never have imagined." We sat in silence for a moment, 2 people connected by an event that had shaped both our lives in different ways. "I'm telling you this now because I understand you're facing a difficult situation with your family," Mr. Harrison said, his tone shifting to something more practical. "And I want you to know that you have resources available to you. Legal support, media contacts, whatever you need to handle this situation cleanly. I've worked with families like yours before, Ms. Carter. Toxic families don't give up easily. When they feel their power slipping away, they become dangerous." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Your father has called me twice in the past week," he replied. "He's been trying to explain that you're mentally unstable, that this foreclosure business is some kind of breakdown, that I shouldn't trust anything you say or do. He's attempting to poison your professional relationships before you can act." Cold anger flared in my chest. Even now, even after everything my father was trying to destroy me. "I told him," Mr. Harrison continued, "that in my considerable experience evaluating people, I have never met anyone more stable, more competent, or more trustworthy than you. And I told him that if he contacted me again to disparage his own daughter, I would consider it harassment and respond accordingly." For the first time since Christmas Eve, I felt something other than isolated determination. I felt supported, I felt seen, not just by Mrs. Patterson's kind letter or the neighbors reaching out with suppressed memories, but by someone with real power who was willing to stand beside me. "Thank you," I whispered, unable to find more eloquent words. "No, Ms. Carter," he replied. "Thank you. For my daughter. For every life she's touched since. And for reminding an old businessman that character matters more than credentials." When we ended the call, I sat alone in my office processing everything I had learned. Mr. Harrison had become something I never expected to find: a father figure who saw my worth, who recognized my value, who offered support without demanding anything in return. The contrast with my actual father could not have been more stark. Mr. Harrison was right about one thing: they were about to become dangerous. Mr. Harrison's warning echoed in my mind throughout the final days of January. Toxic families become dangerous when they feel their power slipping. I had braced myself for more phone calls, more threatening messages, perhaps even attempts to contact my business partners beyond the calls to Mr. Harrison that had already failed. What I had not anticipated was a coordinated public assault designed to destroy my reputation before I could defend myself. The first attack came through Facebook, of all places. My mother had always been meticulous about her social media presence, curating an image of the perfect family with the perfect life. Her posts featured flattering photographs from charity events, humble brags about Victoria's accomplishments, and inspirational quotes about gratitude and blessings. She had built a following among her peers, women of similar age and social standing, who believed they knew her through the careful performance she presented online. On the last Sunday of January, she weaponized that following against me. The post appeared in the early afternoon. I learned about it not through my own feeds, since I had long ago muted notifications from my family's accounts, but through a frantic text from a distant cousin asking what was happening. I found my mother's words and read them with a cold knot forming in my stomach. "I never thought I would have to write something like this," she had begun. "But my heart is breaking, and I need the support of my friends and community. My eldest daughter has abandoned us in our old age. After everything we sacrificed for her, all the love we poured into raising her, she has decided to try to take our home. The home where she grew up. The home filled with memories of family Christmases and birthday celebrations. She wants to throw us into the street." The post continued for several paragraphs, painting a picture of devoted parents blindsided by an ungrateful child's cruelty. She mentioned nothing about identity theft, Nothing about years of psychological abuse. Nothing about throwing her grandchildren into the snow on Christmas Eve. In her telling, she and my father were innocent victims of a daughter who had inexplicably turned against them. "Please pray for us," she concluded. "And please, if you know Melissa, encourage her to remember what family means. We still love her despite everything. We just want our daughter back." The comments multiplied rapidly. Friends and acquaintances expressed shock and sympathy. People who had attended my parents' parties, who had admired their beautiful home and seemingly perfect life, rallied to their defense. They called me ungrateful. They called me cruel. They shared the post to their own networks, spreading my mother's version of events to hundreds, then thousands of people who had no way of knowing the truth. My phone began buzzing with messages from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Aunts and uncles and cousins all demanding explanations, all starting from the assumption that I was in the wrong. "How could you do this to your parents? They're elderly, Melissa. Have you no shame? Your grandmother would be devastated if she could see what you've become." That last one stung the most. They were invoking my grandmother, the one person who had truly loved me, as a weapon against me. They had no idea that she had seen the truth, that she had tried to protect me even from beyond the grave. I did not respond to any of the messages. I did not comment on my mother's post. I saved everything, screenshotting each comment, documenting the spread of her lies through my social networks. Victoria's attack came 2 days later, and it was even worse. She had cultivated a modest following on Instagram through her carefully curated lifestyle content, the designer clothes and luxury vacations funded by money stolen from my accounts. Now she used that platform to launch a video assault that made our mother's Facebook post look restrained by comparison. I watched the recording after the fact, unable to stomach it live. Victoria sat in front of her camera with tears streaming down her carefully made-up face, mascara running in photogenic streaks, her voice trembling with practiced emotion. "I can't stay silent anymore," she said. "My sister Melissa has been trying to destroy our family for years. She's always been jealous of me ever since we were children. She couldn't stand that I was happy that I had friends, that Mom and Dad were proud of me. So she's been working to tear us apart." She described me as cold, greedy, mentally unstable. She claimed I had stolen money from our parents. She said I was using legal tricks to take their home out of spite. She begged her followers to understand how painful it was to watch her beloved family being torn apart by someone so consumed with envy. The video accumulated thousands of views within hours. Comments poured in supporting Victoria, attacking me, speculating about what kind of monster would treat her own family so terribly. Some viewers found my company's public pages and left negative reviews warning potential clients about the character of the woman who ran the business. I watched all of it unfold with a strange sense of detachment. Part of me wanted to scream the truth into the void, to post my own video revealing the identity theft and the embezzlement and the Christmas Eve betrayal. Part of me wanted to share the evidence I had gathered to expose their lies with documentation they couldn't refute. But Patricia had warned me about this. She had explained that public battles rarely ended well, that responding emotionally would only fuel the drama my family was creating. The court of public opinion was not where this case would be decided. The real courts, where evidence mattered and lies had consequences, that was where I would win. So I stayed silent online while privately saving every post, every comment, every lie for the file that grew thicker by the day. The hardest moment came when Emma found me staring at my phone with tears in my eyes. "Mommy, why are there mean things about you on the computer?" she asked, her voice small and worried. Lucas stood behind her, too young to understand, but old enough to feel the tension. I pulled them both onto my lap, holding them close while I searched for words that would protect their innocence without teaching them to lie. "Sometimes people say untrue things when they're scared," I finally said. "Grandma and Grandpa are scared right now, and scared people sometimes do things that aren't kind. But the truth always comes out eventually. You just have to be patient and keep being good, and eventually everyone sees what's real." Emma nodded solemnly. "Like when Tommy said I cheated on the spelling test, but then the teacher saw I didn't." "Exactly like that, sweetheart." After they returned to their games, I sat alone with my phone scrolling through the hatred my family had unleashed. 32 years of being underestimated had taught me patience. I would not react emotionally. I would not give them the satisfaction of a public meltdown. I would respond strategically at the time and place of my choosing. And that response was coming very soon. But first, I received a message that changed everything. Like a voice from the past reaching across 14 years of silence, someone reached out with the truth I had been waiting my entire adult life to hear. The message arrived in my email inbox on a gray February morning, sandwiched between client communications and automated notifications. I almost deleted it as spam. The subject line read simply, "Re-estate of Eleanor Catherine Carter, Private Trust Administration." And the sender was an attorney whose name I did not recognize. Something made me pause before moving it to trash. My grandmother's name was Eleanor. She had passed away 14 years ago when I was 18 and just beginning my escape from my family's control. I had been told she left nothing behind, that whatever modest savings she possessed had been consumed by medical bills and funeral expenses. I had accepted this explanation without question, too young and powerless to investigate further. I opened the email with trembling fingers. "Dear Ms. Melissa Carter," it began. "My name is Charles Morrison, and I am the executor of your grandmother, Eleanor Carter's private trust. I apologize for the unusual nature of this communication, but the circumstances of the trust require me to contact you directly rather than through family channels." My heart nearly stopped. "Your grandmother created a conditional trust for you before her death with specific instructions regarding when and how it should be delivered. The conditions for release were that you either reach the age of 35, have children, or demonstrate financial independence through documented income exceeding $100,000 annually. According to my records, you now meet all three conditions." I read the paragraph 3 times, unable to process what I was seeing. My grandmother had left me something. Not nothing as I had been told. Something she had hidden, protected, kept secret from the very family members who had convinced me she had nothing to give. The email continued with instructions for verifying my identity and claiming the trust. Mr. Morrison included his office address and phone number, inviting me to contact him at my earliest convenience to complete the transfer process. I called him within the hour. Charles Morrison turned out to be a soft-spoken man in his 70s, semi-retired now, but still handling the few remaining matters from his long career in estate law. He had known my grandmother personally. He explained having helped her with various legal matters over the final decade of her life. "Eleanor was a remarkable woman," he said, "very private about certain things, especially when it came to family dynamics. She came to me about 15 years ago wanting to set up a trust that her son and daughter-in-law would never know about. She was very specific about the conditions and very insistent that I personally oversee its administration until the time was right." "Why didn't you contact me sooner?" I asked, my voice unsteady. "I've met the conditions for years now." "Your grandmother left additional instructions," Mr. Morrison replied carefully. "She told me that if you were living peacefully, succeeding quietly, building a good life away from your parents' influence, I should let the trust continue to grow. The principal was modest, but 14 years of conservative investment has increased its value significantly. However, she also instructed that if you ever faced direct conflict with your family, that would be the moment you needed this inheritance most." "How did you know about the conflict?" "I've been monitoring public information about your situation," he admitted. "When the social media posts began circulating, when the family dispute became visible, I recognized the signs your grandmother had described. She knew this day might come. She wanted to be here for you when it did, even if she could only do so through me." The trust contained $50,000. For a woman who had lived as modestly as my grandmother, who had worked as a seamstress and later as a department store clerk, who had never owned a new car or taken an expensive vacation in her entire life, this sum represented a fortune saved across decades of careful frugality. She had hidden it from her own son, protected it from the family that would have exploited it, and preserved it for the granddaughter she loved most. But the money was not the most important thing the trust contained. Mr. Morrison had sent a scanned copy of a handwritten letter that had been sealed with the original trust documents. When I opened the file and saw my grandmother's familiar handwriting, the tears came before I could even read the words. "My dearest Melissa," the letter began. "If you are reading this, then the time has come for you to know the truth. I was too weak to speak while I lived. I know how they treat you. I have watched for years as your parents favored Victoria, dismissed your accomplishments, and made you feel unwanted in your own family. It has broken my heart more than you can know." I had to stop reading to catch my breath. She had seen. All those years when I thought I was alone in my suffering, when I believed no one noticed or cared, she had been watching. "I wanted to help while I was alive," the letter continued, "but I was too weak to fight them directly. Your father was my son, and your mother had such control over him that confrontation seemed impossible. So I did what I could in secret. This money is yours, saved over many years, hidden where they could never find it or take it from you. Use it for whatever will make you happy." The next paragraph made my blood run cold. "I also left you my mother's diamond ring, the one I always said would go to my favorite granddaughter. If you do not have this ring, then someone has taken it from you. It was meant to be yours and yours alone. I wrote this clearly in my personal effects inventory. If they tell you otherwise, they are lying." I knew instantly which ring she meant. A beautiful antique piece with a central diamond surrounded by smaller stones set in delicate gold filigree that my grandmother had treasured above all her other possessions. I had admired it as a child, and she had promised it would be mine someday. I had seen that ring hundreds of times over the past 14 years. On my mother's finger. My mother had worn my inheritance to countless parties, church services, and social gatherings. She had shown it off to friends, claiming it was a gift from someone whose name changed, depending on who was asking. She had flaunted the physical symbol of my grandmother's love, while treating me like an unwelcome burden. The letter closed with words that broke me completely. "I love you, my diamond girl. You were always my favorite, though. I know grandmothers are not supposed to say such things. You have a strength in you that they will never understand or appreciate. Whatever happens, remember that you are exactly who you were meant to be. All my love forever, Grandma." I sat alone in my office and wept for the woman who had loved me, who had seen me, who had tried to protect me even after death. 14 years after her passing, she was still fighting for me. I had evidence now of theft, fraud, and lies spanning decades. The identity theft, Victoria's embezzlement, the stolen inheritance, the ring taken from my grandmother's estate and worn by the woman who had convinced me I was worthless. It was time to confront them face to face. The letter from my grandmother gave me the final piece of clarity I needed. For weeks, I had been gathering evidence, building a case, preparing for a confrontation I both dreaded and desperately needed. Now armed with proof of crimes spanning decades and strengthened by words of love from beyond the grave, I was ready to face my family one last time. Patricia helped me arrange the meeting. We sent a formal letter to my parents' attorney, the one they had hastily retained after receiving the foreclosure notice, proposing a settlement conference at Patricia's office. The language was carefully neutral, suggesting this was an opportunity to resolve matters peacefully before legal proceedings advanced further. We gave them the impression that I might be willing to negotiate, perhaps even retreat, if they approached the conversation in good faith. They arrived on a Thursday afternoon in late February, dressed as though attending a charity gala rather than a legal meeting. My mother wore an elegant navy suit with gold jewelry, including the antique diamond ring that had once belonged to my grandmother. My father had chosen his most authoritative business attire, the costume of a man accustomed to commanding rooms and winning arguments. Victoria accompanied them in a designer dress that probably cost more than my first month's rent after college, her expression a carefully crafted mixture of wounded innocence and quiet superiority. They walked into the conference room expecting to bully me into submission. I could see it in their body language, the way they arranged themselves across the table, like generals preparing for a siege. They believed this was simply another situation they could manipulate, another problem they could make disappear through intimidation and emotional leverage. They had no idea what was coming. I sat beside Patricia at the head of the table, a large screen mounted on the wall behind us. My face was calm, my hands steady, my breathing controlled. 32 years of practice at hiding my emotions served me well in that moment. "Thank you for coming," Patricia began, her voice professionally neutral. "My client has asked me to present some information before we discuss potential resolutions. I would ask that you hold your comments until the presentation is complete." My father opened his mouth to object, but Patricia had already touched her laptop and the first image appeared on the screen. It was a credit card application bearing my name, my social security number, and a signature that was clearly not mine. The address listed was my parents' home. The date was 14 years ago, when I was 22 years old and too naive to suspect the people who claimed to love me. "This is one of 2 credit cards opened in my client's name without her knowledge or consent," Patricia said calmly. "The signatures are demonstrably forged. The debts incurred on these accounts damaged my client's credit for years and constitute federal identity theft under 18 U.S.C. Section 1028. She advanced to the next slide. More documentation. The personal loan application. Bank statements showing charges my parents had made while I struggled to understand why financial institutions treated me with such suspicion. I watched my family's faces as the evidence accumulated. My father's confident expression began to crack, uncertainty replacing arrogance. My mother's hand moved unconsciously to her throat, touching the pearl necklace she wore as if it could protect her. Victoria's smugness flickered, though she tried to maintain her superior demeanor. "Moving on to more recent matters," Patricia continued. "These are records of electronic transfers from my client's savings account to an account belonging to Victoria Carter." The screen displayed a spreadsheet of transactions, dates, amounts, running totals. 3 years of systematic theft documented in meticulous detail. Victoria's face drained of color. She turned to our parents as if expecting them to explain this away, but they were staring at the screen with expressions of dawning horror. They had known about the identity theft because they had committed it. But Victoria's embezzlement was apparently news to them as well. "The total amount transferred without authorization exceeds $15,000, Patricia said. "This constitutes theft by electronic means a felony in this state." She advanced through several more slides, the mortgage documents proving I held the debt on my parents' house, the calculations showing they owed me over $180,000, the legal timeline for foreclosure proceedings that had already begun. Then she displayed the final piece of evidence. My grandmother's letter appeared on the screen, her handwriting large enough for everyone to read. Patricia gave them time to absorb the words, to understand that Eleanor had known about their cruelty, had tried to protect me, had specifically mentioned the ring that now sat on my mother's trembling finger. "The ring described in this letter," Patricia said, "was specifically bequeathed to my client. Its current possession by Mrs. Carter constitutes theft from an estate, a criminal offense separate from the other matters we've discussed." The silence in the room was absolute. My mother had begun crying, tears streaming down her carefully made-up face. My father's hands shook visibly against the conference table. Victoria looked like she might be sick, her designer dress suddenly seeming less like armor and more like a costume that no longer fit. I spoke for the first time since they had entered the room. "I could send you to prison." My voice was calm, steady, almost gentle. "The identity theft alone is a federal crime. You could spend years in federal custody. Victoria could face state charges for embezzlement. The theft of grandmother's ring adds another count. Prosecutors would have everything they need to destroy all of you." I let the words settle before continuing. "But I'm not going to do that. Not today. Not unless you force me to." My mother looked up with desperate hope in her eyes, already calculating how to use this apparent mercy to her advantage. "All I want is for you to leave the house within 60 days. You can take your personal belongings, your furniture, whatever isn't attached to the property. After that, I never want to see or hear from you again. No contact with me. No contact with my children. We are finished as a family." "And the ring," I added, looking directly at my mother. "Grandmother's ring. You will return it to me before you leave this room." "There's one more condition," Patricia interjected. "You will each sign a confession acknowledging what you've done. These confessions will be kept sealed in my office unless you violate any term of the agreement. If you contact my client, harass her, defame her publicly, or attempt any form of retaliation, the confessions will be released to prosecutors along with all supporting evidence." My father's face reddened with anger. "This is blackmail," he sputtered. "You can't do this. We'll fight this in court. We'll tell everyone what you're really like." Patricia cut him off with a voice like cold steel. "Mr. Carter, respectfully, you have no leverage here. None. The evidence against you is overwhelming and thoroughly documented. Any attorney you consult will tell you the same thing. You are being offered an extraordinarily generous resolution that allows you to avoid criminal prosecution and walk away with your freedom intact. I strongly suggest you accept it." The room fell silent again. I watched my family grapple with a reality they had never imagined. The daughter they had dismissed as worthless held their fate in her hands, and there was nothing they could do about it. My mother slowly removed the ring from her finger and placed it on the table between us. Her hand trembled as she withdrew it, leaving the antique diamonds glinting under the conference room lights. I thought they would surrender then. I thought the weight of evidence and the clarity of their situation would finally break through their denial. Instead, they chose to fight one last battle. The meeting at Patricia's office had ended without resolution. My parents had refused to sign the confessions, refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing, and stormed out with threats of legal retaliation that both Patricia and I knew were empty. Victoria had followed them, her earlier composure shattered, mascara streaking her cheeks as she hurled accusations at me in the elevator lobby. They had been given every opportunity to accept a generous settlement. They had chosen war instead. What followed in the first week of March proved that desperate people make desperate choices, and desperate choices have consequences. The first attack came digitally. Mr. Harrison called me on a Tuesday morning, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Someone has been sending anonymous emails to my board members and several of your other business partners," he said. "The emails claim you've committed financial fraud, that your company's books are falsified, that investors should withdraw immediately before a scandal breaks." My stomach dropped, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Do you know who sent them?" My IT security team traced the emails within hours. They were routed through several anonymizing services, but the original IP address corresponds to a residential location in your parents' neighborhood. When we cross-referenced the timing and writing style with publicly available social media posts, the match was obvious. Victoria. Of course it was Victoria. "She's not very good at this," Mr. Harrison continued, a note of grim satisfaction entering his voice. "The accusations are vague, poorly written, and easily disproved. More importantly, she's now created documented evidence of attempted interference with business relationships, which could constitute tortious interference in most jurisdictions. I've forwarded everything to your attorney." Patricia confirmed the implications when I called her immediately afterward. Victoria's desperate attempt to destroy my reputation had backfired spectacularly. Not only had she failed to damage my business relationships, she had created additional evidence of her willingness to lie and deceive when cornered. The pattern was now undeniable: identity theft, embezzlement, defamation, and attempted business sabotage. Any prosecutor reviewing this case would see a family of serial fraudsters, not wronged parents, victimized by an ungrateful daughter. What was meant to destroy me had only strengthened my position. But the digital attack was merely a prelude. The physical confrontation came 4 nights later. I was preparing for bed, having just finished reviewing Emma's homework and reading Lucas his favorite bedtime story. The house was quiet, the children asleep, the night peaceful in the way only late winter evenings can be. Then the doorbell rang, not once, but repeatedly, followed by pounding so violent I thought the door might splinter. I approached the entrance with my phone already in hand, ready to call for help. Through the peephole I saw my father's face distorted with rage, his fist raised to pound again. My mother stood behind him, her expression wild tears streaming down her face. "Open this door!" my father bellowed. "Open it right now!" I did not open it. Instead, I spoke through the closed door, keeping my voice as steady as I could manage. "You need to leave. You're not welcome here." "You're destroying us," my mother wailed. "After everything we did for you, we're going to lose everything." "We need money," my father shouted. "You have more than enough. You owe us. You owe us for raising you, for feeding you, for putting a roof over your head. Give us what we're owed." I realized with a strange detachment that this was who they had always been underneath the polished exterior. The threats and demands and sense of entitlement had always existed, merely masked by the power imbalance that had kept me submissive for 3 decades. Now that the balance had shifted, the mask had shattered completely. "If you don't help us," my father continued, his voice rising to a scream, "we'll tell everyone what you've done. We'll go to the media. We'll tell them you're trying to throw your elderly parents onto the street. We'll destroy your precious reputation." The pounding resumed harder than before. Somewhere in the neighborhood a light flickered on. Then another. I heard small footsteps behind me and turned to find Emma and Lucas standing at the end of the hallway, their faces pale with terror. Lucas was crying silently, his small body trembling. Emma had positioned herself protectively in front of her brother, trying to be brave despite the fear in her eyes. "Go back to your rooms," I said gently. "It's okay. Mommy is handling this." But they didn't move. They stood frozen, listening to their grandparents' rage against the door that separated our safe home from their fury. The neighbors had apparently heard enough. Within minutes, red and blue lights illuminated the street, and 2 police officers approached my parents from behind. The pounding stopped abruptly as my father turned to face the new arrivals. I opened the door then, keeping my children behind me, and calmly explained the situation to the officers. I provided context about the ongoing family dispute, the legal proceedings, the previous threats and harassment. I showed them the recording of my mother's phone call from weeks earlier. I gave them Patricia's contact information for verification. The officers were professional and thorough. They interviewed my parents separately, documented the disturbance, and took statements from the neighbors who had called. When they returned to speak with my father, their tone had shifted from neutral to stern. "Sir, you need to leave this property immediately," one officer said. "You've been warned that further contact of this nature will result in harassment charges. Your daughter has documentation of an ongoing pattern of threatening behavior. If we're called back here or if she reports any additional incidents, you will be arrested." My father's face contorted with impotent rage. He looked at me standing in the doorway, my children pressed against my sides, and I saw in his eyes the hatred that had always been there. But now, finally, he was the one who was powerless. He had no leverage, no authority, no ability to hurt me further. The man who had controlled my childhood through fear and manipulation was being escorted away by police, while his rejected daughter watched from the safety of her own home. They left in silence, my mother weeping, my father refusing to look back. The officers remained until their car had disappeared around the corner, then offered me contact information for victim services before departing. I closed and locked the door, then gathered my trembling children in my arms. "I'm so sorry you had to see that," I whispered, holding them close. "Grandma and Grandpa are very sick in their hearts. Sick people sometimes act scary, but it's not because of anything you did. You're safe. Mommy will always keep you safe." Lucas looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "Are we bad people, Mommy? Is that why they're so angry at us?" My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. "No, baby. We're not bad. Not at all." I cupped his small face in my hands, making sure he could see the truth in my eyes. Sometimes people hurt others because they're hurting inside. They don't know how to deal with their own pain, so they push it onto everyone around them. It's not your fault. It's not my fault. It's not our fault. I held them until their trembling stopped, until their breathing steadied, until they felt safe enough to return to their beds. As I tucked them in again, kissing foreheads and smoothing blankets, I realized something profound was happening. My children were learning what I never had the chance to learn at their age, that love doesn't mean accepting abuse. That family doesn't give anyone the right to hurt you. That protecting yourself is not betrayal. The cycle that had poisoned generations was finally breaking. The clock was ticking toward the foreclosure deadline. And then the final letter arrived. The 90 days passed faster than I expected, each one bringing my family closer to a reckoning they had spent their entire lives avoiding. The final notice from Patricia's office was delivered on the last day of March, a formal document informing my parents that they had failed to satisfy the outstanding debt and that foreclosure proceedings would commence immediately. The house would be scheduled for auction within 60 days. I felt no satisfaction reading the confirmation, only a heavy sense of inevitability of dominoes falling in a sequence that had been set in motion long before that Christmas Eve confrontation. My parents had been given every opportunity to take responsibility, to negotiate in good faith, to salvage something from the wreckage of their own choices. They had refused at every turn. The consequences were no longer in my hands. $182,000. That was the sum they needed to save their home, a number that would have been manageable 5 years ago if they had lived within their means, paid their obligations, and treated their eldest daughter with basic human decency. Instead, they had stolen from me, lied to the community, and burned every bridge that might have offered rescue. Their credit was destroyed partly by the very debts they had opened in my name years ago. Banks refused to speak with them. Friends they had cultivated through decades of social climbing suddenly became unavailable when called. Relatives who had once admired their lavish lifestyle discovered the truth through community gossip and wanted no part of the scandal. The financial house of cards they had built on exploitation and deception was collapsing, and no one was willing to stand beneath it. I learned through Mrs. Patterson, who continued to send me occasional updates, that my parents had tried everything. They had approached wealthy acquaintances from their country club only to be politely but firmly refused. They had contacted distant relatives claiming medical emergencies, but the stories didn't hold up under scrutiny. They had even attempted to take out loans using Victoria as a co-signer, but her own credit had been damaged by the embezzlement investigation Patricia had quietly initiated as leverage. The house that had been their pride was now their prison, a monument to their failures that they could no longer afford to maintain. The mansion where they had thrown lavish parties, where they had looked down on their poor daughter, where they had ultimately thrown her children into the snow on Christmas Eve, was scheduled to be sold to the highest bidder. The family who had appeared to have everything was about to be left with nothing. My mother, true to form, refused to accept her fate quietly. She launched a desperate campaign to rehabilitate her image, reaching out to community members with tearful pleas for support. She posted on social media about being victimized by her own daughter. She called former friends and begged them to intervene on her behalf. But the narrative had shifted beyond her control. Too many people had learned the truth. The story of the grandmother's will had spread through channels I never anticipated. Neighbors who had witnessed the police arriving at my home that night had shared their observations with others. Former acquaintances who had always sensed something wrong beneath my family's polished exterior finally felt validated in their suspicions. Some people began posting publicly in my defense. A woman I barely remembered from high school wrote a lengthy Facebook comment describing how she had witnessed my mother belittling me at a community event 20 years ago. Mrs. Patterson shared with my permission a carefully worded account of what she had observed over decades of living next door to my parents. Even some of Victoria's former friends began distancing themselves, uncomfortable with the mounting evidence that the glamorous lifestyle they had admired was built on stolen money. Others simply stopped returning my mother's calls. The silence was more devastating than any public condemnation. The woman who had spent decades crafting an image of the perfect family watched that image crumble in weeks. The community that had admired and envied her now whispered behind her back, or worse, refused to acknowledge her existence at all. My father made one final call on a gray April afternoon. I was sitting in my office reviewing contracts for a new project that would keep my company busy through the summer when his name appeared on my phone. I hesitated before answering, half expecting another tirade of threats and accusations. Instead, I heard something I had never heard from him before defeat. "Melissa." His voice was quiet, stripped of the bluster and authority that had defined him my entire life. "Please. I'm asking you, please. We're your parents. Whatever we did, whatever happened between us, we're family. We're your family." I listened to the silence on the line, to the weight of everything that remained unspoken between us. 32 years of memories flickered through my mind. The Christmas mornings when I received nothing while Victoria opened present after present. The achievements that were never celebrated. The sacrifices that were never acknowledged. The identity theft that sabotaged my early career. The grandmother's ring stolen from my inheritance and worn as a trophy. The children thrown into the snow while my family returned to their warm living room. Family doesn't steal, I finally said, my voice calm and steady. Family doesn't lie. Family doesn't forge signatures on credit applications or take money from savings accounts or wear stolen rings to church every Sunday. He tried to interrupt, but I continued. Family doesn't throw children into the snow on Christmas Eve and then go back to laughing and drinking as if nothing happened. Family doesn't call their daughter poor in front of 200 people to get a laugh. Family doesn't spend 32 years making someone feel worthless and then expect them to save you when the consequences finally arrive. Melissa, please. You had 32 years to treat me like family. Every single day for 32 years, you had the chance to love me, to support me, to acknowledge my existence as something more than an inconvenience. You chose not to. Every day, you made that choice. I took a breath, feeling the strange piece of words I should have spoken decades ago. I'm making the same choice now. Goodbye, Dad. I ended the call without waiting for his response. There was nothing more to say. No argument could undo 32 years of deliberate cruelty. No plea could erase the evidence documented in Patricia's files. No amount of desperation could rebuild the bridges they had burned with such dedication. I sat alone in my office for a long time after that call, waiting for the tears to come. They never did. I had cried enough over this family. I had grieved enough for the parents I wished I had and the childhood I deserved. There was nothing left but quiet finality, the closing of a door that should have been shut years ago. The foreclosure would proceed. The house would be sold. My parents would face the consequences of choices they had made long before that Christmas party. None of it was my responsibility anymore. But the confrontation that would finally set me free was still ahead. The request for a final meeting came through Patricia, relayed from my parents' attorney. They wanted to see me before the auction, one last conversation in the house that had been the backdrop of my entire painful childhood. Patricia advised against it, warning that desperate people often made desperate plays. But something in me needed this closure. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, just understanding. I wanted to walk through those doors one last time as the woman I had become, not the invisible girl I had been. I arrived on a mild April afternoon, parking in the circular driveway where I had once stood shivering with my children in the Christmas Eve snow. The mansion looked different now, smaller somehow, its grandeur diminished by the knowledge that it would soon belong to strangers. A foreclosure notice was posted near the entrance, an official declaration of the fall from grace that my family had brought upon themselves. I walked through the front door without knocking. The entryway that had once intimidated me with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers now seemed merely old, dated, a relic of pretensions that no longer held any power. I moved through the house slowly, letting myself see each room with fresh eyes. The kitchen, where I had been slapped for buying Victoria a bracelet with my saved lunch money. The living room, where Victoria had opened mountains of presents while I sat empty-handed. The dining room, where I had served meals I was never allowed to fully enjoy. the back hallway where I had been cornered after the Christmas party and told I was never really my mother's daughter. Every room held memories, and every memory carried pain. But the pain felt different now. Distant, like scars from wounds that had finally healed. I found them in the formal living room, arranged like characters in a play waiting for the final act. My parents sat together on the antique sofa, and the change in them was startling. My father seemed to have aged a decade. In 3 months, his posture stooped, his face lined with exhaustion. My mother looked hollow, her careful grooming abandoned her eyes, red-rimmed and shadowed. Victoria stood in the corner with her arms crossed, defensive and defiant, but even her usual smugness seemed forced. The power dynamic had completely reversed. I was the one with resources, with leverage, with the ability to walk away. They were the ones who needed something from me. Everyone in that room understood this truth, even if no one spoke it aloud. My mother broke the silence first, falling back on the manipulation that had defined our entire relationship. "Melissa, darling," her voice cracked with practiced emotion. "We did everything for you. We raised you, we fed you, we gave you a home. Maybe we weren't perfect, but we loved you in our way. Parents make mistakes. Can't you find it in your heart to forgive us?" I let her words hang in the air for a moment, then reached into my bag and withdrew a single sheet of paper, my grandmother's letter. "I want to read you something," I said calmly. I read the letter aloud, every word my grandmother had written 14 years ago. The acknowledgement that she had seen how they treated me, the confession that she had been too weak to fight them directly, the money she had saved in secret, hidden from the family that would have taken it, the ring she had left specifically for me, the declaration that I had always been her favorite. With each sentence, my mother's face transformed. The false sympathy drained away, replaced by something raw and ugly: guilt, fear, the expression of someone watching their carefully constructed lies collapse. "You stole from me my entire life," I said, setting down the letter. "You stole money through credit cards you opened in my name. You stole my savings through Victoria's embezzlement. You stole the only inheritance my grandmother left me and wore it on your finger to church every Sunday." My mother opened her mouth to protest, but I continued. "But worst of all, you stole my belief that I deserved to be loved. You made me think I was worthless, that something was fundamentally wrong with me, that I had to earn affection that should have been given freely, that theft damaged me in ways no amount of money can measure." The room fell silent. My father sat with his head bowed, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. Victoria looked like she wanted to flee, but couldn't bring herself to move. My mother stared at me with an expression I couldn't read, and then my father spoke. "You want to know why your mother always chose Victoria?" His voice was quiet, defeated, stripped of every pretense he had maintained for decades. "You want to understand why nothing you did was ever good enough, why your sister got everything while you got nothing." "Don't," my mother hissed. "Don't you dare." But he continued as if she hadn't spoken. "Victoria isn't my daughter." The words landed like bombs in the quiet room. Victoria gasped audibly, her defensive posture crumbling. My mother screamed something incoherent and lunged toward my father, but he simply raised his hand and she stopped, frozen by whatever she saw in his eyes. "I found out when Victoria was 2 years old." He continued, his voice eerily calm. "Medical records, blood types that didn't match. I confronted your mother and she confessed. An affair with someone from her office. Brief, she said. A mistake, she said. She begged me to stay, promised it would never happen again, swore she would make it up to me." I stood paralyzed, unable to process what I was hearing. I stayed because I was weak, because I was afraid of scandal, because despite everything I still loved her. He laughed bitterly. "And she spent the next 30 years making it up to me by destroying you." "That's not true," my mother whispered, but her voice held no conviction. "She was always guilty," my father continued, finally looking up at me. "Always afraid the truth would come out. So she overcompensated. She protected Victoria obsessively, gave her everything, built her up at every opportunity. and she pushed you away because you were the reminder. Every time she looked at you, she saw the marriage she had betrayed. She saw my face, my blood, my legitimate child. She saw evidence of her own guilt. I turned to my mother, seeing her clearly for the first time. Not as the powerful figure who had controlled my childhood, but as a frightened woman who had spent 3 decades trying to bury a secret by destroying her own daughter. I wasn't unlovable, I said slowly, the realization settling into my bones. I wasn't unworthy. I was just evidence. Evidence of what you did. Evidence of what you almost lost. You couldn't love me because loving me meant facing your own guilt. My mother said nothing. There was nothing she could say. Victoria had collapsed into a chair, her face pale, her entire identity shattered by a revelation she had never suspected. The golden child, the favorite daughter, the family's pride and joy had been elevated not because of her merit, but because of her mother's affair. Everything she believed about herself was built on a lie. I looked around the room at the wreckage of my family. My defeated father, my exposed mother, my devastated sister. The house that would soon be sold to strangers. The secrets that could no longer be hidden. The truth didn't make the pain disappear. 32 years of damage couldn't be undone by a single revelation. But for the first time, everything finally made sense. The favoritism, the cruelty, the desperate need to make me invisible. It was never about me at all. And now at last, I could let it go. The revelation about Victoria's parentage hung over everything that followed. I left my parents' house that April afternoon carrying a strange mixture of emotions, relief at finally understanding grief for the childhood I had lost to my mother's guilt, and an unexpected numbness where I had anticipated either triumph or rage. The truth had set something free inside me, but it had also illuminated the full scope of what had been stolen from my life. The auction took place 3 weeks later on a cloudless May morning. I did not attend. Patricia handled the legal formalities on my behalf, calling me afterward with the results. The house sold for $320,000, a figure far below its peak value but reasonable given the rushed timeline and the whispers of scandal that had attached themselves to the property. Buyers at foreclosure auctions rarely pay full price, and my parents' former neighbors had ensured that everyone in the community knew the circumstances behind the sale. The proceeds were distributed according to the legal framework Patricia had established. My mortgage debt was satisfied first, the $182,000 I was owed, finally recovered after years of invisible support and deliberate theft. The remaining funds, approximately $130,000, after various fees and expenses, went to my parents as the original property owners. It was enough for them to start over, albeit in dramatically reduced circumstances. They rented a 2-bedroom apartment on the other side of town, far from the neighborhood where they had once held court at lavish parties. The mansion that had been their pride, the symbol of everything they had worked and schemed to achieve, now belonged to a young family who had gotten an excellent deal and knew nothing of the drama that had played out within those walls. I drove past the old house once a few weeks after the new owners moved in. Children's toys dotted the front lawn. A swing set was being assembled in the backyard. Laughter drifted through open windows. The mansion that had witnessed so much cruelty was becoming a genuine home filled with the love and warmth that had been absent during my childhood. The sight brought an unexpected peace. Some places can be redeemed by new beginnings. Victoria's collapse happened faster and more publicly than our parents' fall from grace. The family drama had become viral content spreading through social media channels I never monitored, but that others eagerly forwarded to me. Someone had compiled a thread documenting the entire saga: the Christmas party revelation, the foreclosure, the identity theft, the embezzlement, the grandmother's stolen inheritance. Screenshots of Victoria's tearful Instagram video claiming I was jealous sat alongside evidence of the money she had stolen from my accounts to fund that very lifestyle. Her followers abandoned her in waves. Comments on her posts shifted from admiration to accusation to outright mockery. Brands that had partnered with her for sponsored content quietly terminated their agreements, unwilling to associate their products with someone exposed as a thief and a fraud. The influencer persona she had cultivated so carefully, the glamorous life that had made her the envy of thousands, crumbled in weeks. Her engagement fell apart shortly after. Richard, the man who had planned to propose at the Christmas party before my unexpected vindication, derailed the announcement, discovered the truth about how Victoria had financed their relationship. The expensive dinners, the romantic getaways, the gifts she had seemed to shower on him so generously, all of it had been funded by money stolen from her sister. He ended things with a brief text message and blocked her number. I learned about Victoria's phone call to our parents through Mrs. Patterson, who maintained her quiet observation of the family's disintegration. Apparently, Victoria had arrived at their small apartment in a state of hysterical rage, screaming accusations through tears. "You ruined my life," she had shouted. "You made me hate Melissa. You raised me to believe I was special, that she was worthless, that everything I had was because I deserved it. And it was all a lie. Everything I believed about myself, about our family, about who I was, all of it was built on your guilt and your secrets." For the first time, Victoria saw clearly. She had been a pawn in our mother's decades-long campaign to bury her own shame. The favoritism, the gifts, the constant elevation of Victoria above me, none of it had been about Victoria's actual worth. She had been a prop in our mother's psychological drama, raised to continue a cycle of cruelty that had its roots in an affair and a desperate cover-up. I watched all of this from a distance, feeling neither triumph nor satisfaction. The woman I had been 6 months earlier might have found joy in their suffering, might have savored each detail of their downfall as delayed justice for decades of abuse. But standing on the other side of revelation and confrontation, I discovered that watching people suffer brought no pleasure, even when those people had hurt me deeply. They were being punished, but I was not the one punishing them. They were simply experiencing the natural consequences of choices they had made over 30 years. I had merely stopped protecting them from those consequences. There is a difference between revenge and withdrawal, between attacking and simply stepping aside. I took my grandmother's ring to a bank on a quiet afternoon and placed it in a safe deposit box. The antique diamonds caught the fluorescent light as I set it carefully in the metal container, a symbol of love that had survived betrayal and theft and decades of silence. Grandma had wanted me to have it because she saw in me something no one else in my family acknowledged. I would keep it safe until Emma was old enough to understand its history and its meaning. I also started therapy. Twice a week, I sat in a comfortable office with a woman named Dr. Sarah Chen, no relation to my mentor Margaret, and began the slow work of unpacking 32 years of trauma. We talked about childhood wounds and adult patterns, about the ways I had learned to make myself small, about the coping mechanisms that had helped me survive, but now needed to evolve into something healthier. "I thought I would feel different," I told her during one session. "I thought the truth would fix something. But I still wake up some mornings feeling like that little girl watching her sister open presents while holding nothing." Dr. Chen nodded with professional compassion. "Healing isn't a single moment of revelation. It's a process. The truth gave you understanding, which is the foundation. But building a new sense of self on that foundation takes time and deliberate work." "I don't want revenge anymore," I said during another session, surprising myself with the words. "I spent months gathering evidence, building leverage, preparing for battle. And now that I've won, I just feel tired. I don't want to hurt them. I just want peace, Doctor." Chen smiled, the warm expression of someone who recognized progress when she saw it. "That means you're ready to heal. Revenge keeps us tied to the people who hurt us. Peace allows us to finally let them go." I sat with those words for a long time, feeling their truth settle into my bones. I was ready. After 32 years of pain and 3 months of confrontation, I was finally ready to build a life defined by what I wanted rather than what I had survived. And then something I never expected happened. They actually apologized. The healing process Dr. Chen had described was slow and nonlinear, filled with good days when I felt strong and difficult days when old wounds reopened unexpectedly. But I was making progress. I could feel it in the way I interacted with my children, in the calm I maintained when memories surfaced, in the growing sense that my past no longer had to dictate my future. I was learning to define myself by my own choices rather than by my family's failures. Then the letter arrived. It came on a rainy afternoon in late May, a plain white envelope with my parents' new address in the corner. The handwriting on the front was my mother's, though shakier than I remembered the elegant script she had once been so proud of, now trembling and uncertain. I almost threw it away unopened. 6 months of warfare had taught me to expect manipulation in every communication from my family. But something made me pause. Perhaps it was Dr. Chen's voice in my head reminding me that part of healing was staying open to unexpected possibilities. Perhaps it was simply curiosity. Whatever the reason, I sat down at my kitchen table and carefully opened the envelope. The letter inside was handwritten on plain paper, not the expensive stationery my mother had always preferred. I could see where tears had fallen and dried, leaving small wrinkled spots on the page. The words themselves were simple, stripped of the elaborate constructions my mother typically used to obscure her true meaning. "Dear Melissa," it began. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it, and I know that now. But I need you to know something, even if you never respond to this letter, even if you burn it without reading. I need to say what I should have said 32 years ago." I continued reading, my heart beating faster, despite my attempts to remain detached. "I'm sorry. For everything. For choosing Victoria over you at every opportunity. For stealing your identity and your savings and your grandmother's ring. For making you feel worthless when you were the best of all of us. For throwing you and your beautiful children into the cold on Christmas Eve. For every birthday, I forgot every achievement I dismissed, every moment I made you feel invisible in your own family." The letter went on for 2 pages, cataloging specific instances of cruelty I had almost forgotten, acknowledging patterns of behavior I had never expected her to recognize. She wrote about her affair and the guilt that had poisoned her relationship with me. She admitted that Victoria's elevation had been about her own psychological needs, not about anything Victoria or I had actually done. She confessed that she had known about my father's identity theft and had participated in the planning. "Your grandmother was right about you," the letter concluded. "She saw who you really were, the diamond hiding in plain sight. I was just too selfish, too consumed by my own guilt and fear to see what was right in front of me. You deserved so much better than the mother you got. I'm sorry I couldn't be her." I read the letter 3 times, sitting alone at my kitchen table while rain streaked the windows. These were the words I had waited 32 years to hear. The acknowledgement, the accountability, the simple admission that I had deserved better. For most of my life, I would have given anything for this letter. I would have traded success and wealth and independence just to hear my mother say she was sorry. Now, holding the apology in my hands, I felt something unexpected. Not happiness, not vindication, not the triumphant satisfaction I might once have imagined. Just peace. A quiet, settled peace, like a door closing gently on a room I no longer needed to enter. The words mattered, but they no longer had the power to define me. I had already moved beyond needing her validation. My father's apology arrived a few days later, not in a letter but in a text message. 7 words glowing on my phone screen in the middle of an ordinary afternoon. "I'm sorry I was too weak to protect you." No excuses, no justifications, no elaborate explanations about circumstances or pressures or difficult choices. Just a simple acknowledgement of his failure and the role it had played in my suffering. I stared at those 7 words for a long time, thinking about the man who had sent them. My father had never been as actively cruel as my mother. His sins were more passive. The failure to intervene, the willingness to look away, the quiet complicity of someone who knew wrong was being done and lacked the courage to stop it. He had watched my mother systematically destroy my self-worth and said nothing. He had allowed Victoria to be elevated while I was diminished. He had taken the path of least resistance at every turn, and I had paid the price for his weakness. Understanding isn't the same as excusing. I understood now that my father was broken, trapped in a marriage built on betrayal, too afraid of losing everything to stand up for what was right. His passivity wasn't born of malice, but of cowardice. He had failed me not because he wanted me to suffer, but because protecting me would have required courage he didn't possess. It didn't excuse him. Nothing could excuse 3 decades of watching his daughter be treated like a servant and a scapegoat. But it explained him. And sometimes Dr. Chen had taught me understanding is enough to release the anger without requiring full forgiveness. I didn't respond to his message, but I didn't delete it either. Victoria's communication came last arriving as an email several weeks after our parents' apologies. I had expected either continued hostility or desperate pleas for financial help. What I found instead surprised me. "Melissa," she wrote, "I'm not asking for money. I'm not asking for help. I don't deserve either from you. I just need to say something that I should have figured out a long time ago. I was raised to hate you. Mom and Dad taught me from my earliest memories that you were the enemy, that you were jealous of me, that you wanted to take what was mine. I believed everything they told me because I was too young and too selfish to question it. I thought you were the problem. I never realized I was stealing what was yours all along. I lost everything these past few months. My followers, my partnerships, my engagement, my sense of who I am. And I deserve to lose all of it. Every bit of my glamorous life was built on money I stole from you and lies I believed about you. I was a thief and a bully, and I told myself I was the victim. Maybe one day I can be the sister I should have been. Maybe there's still time to build something real between us. I don't know if you can ever forgive me, and I won't blame you if you can't. But I wanted you to know that I finally see the truth, and I'm sorry." I read Victoria's message several times, searching for hidden manipulation, for the familiar patterns of self-serving deception I had come to expect from her. But the words seemed genuine, the accountability real. She wasn't asking for anything. She was simply acknowledging what she had done. I didn't respond immediately. I wasn't ready to open that door to begin the complicated work of potentially rebuilding a relationship with the sister who had been my tormentor. Too much damage had been done. Too many years had been lost. But I didn't delete the message. I saved it in a folder I could return to later when more time had passed, when my healing had progressed further. Some doors shouldn't be closed forever, even doors that had once led only to pain. Forgiveness, I was learning, wasn't about them. It wasn't about absolving their sins or pretending the damage hadn't happened. It was about freeing myself from the weight of carrying their crimes. It was about choosing peace over perpetual warfare. It was about building a future unshackled from the past. Forgiveness wasn't about them. It was about freeing myself. Freeing myself meant building something new. Not just healing from the past, but actively creating a future that reflected who I wanted to be rather than who my family had tried to make me. The summer months became a season of intentional construction, of choosing every element of my life with purpose and care. I bought a new house in June. Not a mansion designed to impress, not a statement of wealth or status, but a warm colonial on a quiet street with mature trees and neighbors who waved when you passed. The backyard was large enough for children to run and play, and the previous owners had left a tire swing hanging from an old oak tree that Emma and Lucas claimed as their own within hours of our first visit. I decorated the rooms with photographs of happy moments. Emma's art projects, bright with color and imagination, hung framed in the hallway. Pictures from Lucas's first soccer game covered the refrigerator. Beach trips where we had built sand castles and collected shells filled albums on the living room shelves. Every image represented joy we had created together, memories that belonged only to us. There were no pictures of my parents, no photographs of Victoria, no reminders of the family that had caused so much pain. This was not about erasing them from history, but about choosing what energy filled our home. The walls held love that was freely given, not weaponized. Affection that was spoken aloud, not withheld as punishment. This house would teach my children what family could be when it was healthy. My company continued to thrive, the partnership with Mr. Harrison's firm progressing smoothly, but I found myself drawn increasingly toward the charitable foundation I had established years earlier. The anonymous scholarships and quiet donations had always been important to me, but now I wanted to do something more specific, something that spoke directly to the experience I had survived. I created a new program specifically for women escaping toxic family situations. Not domestic violence in the traditional sense, though we could provide referrals for that, but the particular cruelty of being abused by parents, siblings, and relatives who used love as a weapon. The women who came to us often didn't recognize their experiences as abuse, because it came wrapped in family obligation and cultural expectations about honoring parents regardless of their behavior. I know what it's like to be gaslit by the people who should love you most. I told my team during the program's launch. To be told you're crazy for seeing clearly, ungrateful for wanting basic respect, selfish for having boundaries. I want to give other women the resources and validation I never had. The program provided emergency housing for women who needed immediate escape, legal support for those facing financial exploitation or identity theft, therapy with counselors who understood the specific dynamics of family abuse. Each woman who came through our doors, who found the courage to break free, who built a new life on her own terms, became proof that the cycle could be broken. My pain had become a bridge for others to cross. One warm July evening, I sat on the back porch watching Emma and Lucas chase fireflies in the fading light. Their laughter drifted across the yard, pure and unself-conscious, the sound of children who felt safe and loved. Emma eventually tired of the game and came to sit beside me, her small body warm against my side. "Mommy," she said after a few minutes of comfortable silence, "do you still love Grandma and Grandpa?" The question caught me off guard, though I supposed I should have expected it. Children process difficult experiences in their own time, circling back to hard topics when they feel ready. I thought carefully before answering, wanting to give her truth without burdening her with adult complexity. "I love them the way you love someone who's hurt you very much," I finally said. "I hope they find happiness. I hope they become better people. But I can't let them hurt us anymore. Does that make sense?" Emma considered this with the serious expression she wore when working through difficult problems. "So, we love them from far away." I smiled through the tears that suddenly blurred my vision. "Yes, baby. We love them from far away. Close enough to wish them well. Far enough to stay safe." She nodded, satisfied with this explanation, and returned to chasing fireflies with her brother. Children understand more than we give them credit for. They grasp emotional truths that adults often complicate with justification and denial. Emma understood perfectly some people we love from far away. Watching my children play in the gathering dusk, I felt something I had rarely experienced in my 32 years. Contentment. Not the absence of problems, but the presence of peace. I was raising children who would never confuse love with control, who would recognize manipulation when they encountered it, who would know their worth without having to prove it. But the story wasn't quite over. There was one more meeting I needed. The meeting I needed came unexpectedly, as the most important moments often do. I had not planned it or orchestrated it. Life simply arranged for our paths to cross one final time, offering closure I hadn't known I was seeking. It happened in a grocery store on a humid July afternoon. I was selecting apples in the produce section, mentally planning the week's meals, when I felt eyes on me. I looked up and saw her standing near the oranges, a basket hanging from her thin arm, staring at me with an expression of mingled fear and longing. My mother looked older than I remembered, though only months had passed since our confrontation at the house. She seemed smaller, somehow diminished in ways that went beyond physical appearance. The elegant clothing she had always worn was replaced by simple, practical items. Her hair, once meticulously styled, hung loosely around a face that showed every one of her years. For a moment I considered walking away. I had said everything that needed saying. The legal matters were resolved, the boundaries were established. There was no requirement for further contact, no obligation to engage. But something stopped me. Perhaps it was the vulnerability in her posture so different from the controlling presence she had maintained throughout my childhood. Perhaps it was the peace I had been cultivating, the forgiveness I had offered for my own sake. Whatever the reason, I found myself walking toward her rather than away. She flinched as I approached, bracing herself for anger or accusation. Instead, I simply asked, "How are you?" The question broke something in her. Tears spilled down her cheeks right there in the produce section between the apples and oranges, while other shoppers navigated around us with polite discomfort. "I'm surviving," she whispered. "That's all. Just surviving." We stood in that aisle for 10 minutes talking quietly while the ordinary business of grocery shopping continued around us. She didn't ask for money. She didn't attempt manipulation. She simply spoke with a raw honesty I had never witnessed from her before. "I chose Victoria because loving you meant facing what I did to your father," she said, her voice barely audible. "You look like him, you know. Same eyes, same expressions. Every time I looked at you, I saw my own guilt staring back at me. It was easier to love the daughter who represented my second chance, who proved I wasn't a terrible person, than to love the one who reminded me of everything I destroyed." It wasn't an excuse. Nothing could excuse 32 years of cruelty. But it was an explanation the closest to genuine honesty she had ever offered. I understood now in a way I couldn't have understood before therapy and healing and time that her treatment of me had never truly been about me. I had been a mirror she couldn't bear to face. I reached into my purse and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was my grandmother's ring, the antique diamonds catching the fluorescent store lights. My mother's eyes widened with recognition. "I'm not giving it back," I clarified quickly. "But I wanted you to see it. Grandma gave it to me because she saw who I really was. She looked at me and saw a diamond when everyone else saw a stone." I closed the box and returned it to my purse. "That's all I ever wanted from you," I said quietly. "To be seen. To be valued for who I was, not punished for what you couldn't face." My mother broke down completely. Her shoulders shaking with sobs she no longer tried to control. I didn't hug her. I didn't offer comfort or reassurance. Those gestures would have been dishonest, pretending a closeness that didn't exist and might never exist. But I gave her something else. Something true. "I forgive you," I said. "For me, not for you. I won't carry this weight anymore." Then I walked away, leaving her standing alone in the produce section with her grief and her regrets. I didn't look back. There was no hatred in my departure, no bitterness fueling my steps. Only release. Only the lightness of finally setting down a burden I had carried for 32 years. And finally, I was ready to live. Living, I discovered, was different from surviving. For 32 years, I had survived. My family survived their cruelty, survived the constant message that I was worthless and unwanted. Now, standing on the porch of my new home on a golden August evening, I understood what it meant to truly live. Emma and Lucas chased each other across the backyard, their laughter rising into the warm air like music. The setting sun painted everything in shades of amber and rose, transforming the ordinary grass and trees into something magical. I watched my children play with the simple joy of kids who felt completely safe, completely loved, completely free to be exactly who they were. The contract with Mr. Harrison's company had been signed the week before, an $80 million partnership that cemented my position as one of the most successful businesswomen in the region. The news had made industry publications and local newspapers. Colleagues sent congratulations. Competitors took notice. By every external measure, I had achieved extraordinary success. But standing on that porch, watching my children catch fireflies in mason jars, I realized the money mattered far less than I once imagined it would. The fortune I had built was meaningful not for the number in my accounts, but for the security it provided, the opportunities it created, the freedom it guaranteed. What truly mattered was this moment, safety, peace, and two small humans who knew without question that they were loved unconditionally. The next morning, I drove to a cemetery I hadn't visited in years. My grandmother's grave sat beneath an old maple tree, the headstone simple and weathered by 14 years of seasons. I brought a bouquet of daisies, her favorite flowers, and the ring she had left me, wanting her to see that her gift had finally reached its intended recipient. I knelt on the grass beside her stone and spoke aloud, feeling slightly foolish but unable to stop the words from flowing. "You were right, Grandma. I was a diamond. I just had to stop believing I was stone." I told her about Emma and Lucas, about their personalities and dreams and the way they made me laugh. I described the house with its tire swing and big backyard. I explained everything that had happened with my parents and Victoria, the revelations and confrontations and ultimate resolution. I shared my success and my struggles and the peace I had finally found. "I wish you could have met them," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "The children. I think you would have loved spoiling them. Emma has your stubbornness, you know. And Lucas has your gentle heart." A breeze rustled through the maple leaves above me, soft and warm, carrying the scent of late summer flowers. I chose to believe it was my grandmother responding, reaching across whatever distance separates the living from the dead, to say what she had always said. "I'm proud of you." That night, after dinner and baths and bedtime stories, I tucked Lucas into his bed and smoothed the covers around his small body. He looked up at me with sleepy eyes, fighting to stay awake for one more moment of connection. "Mommy," he murmured, "are you happy?" The question, so simple from a child's perspective, carried the weight of everything I had experienced. I thought about all the years I had spent trying to earn love that was never available, about the achievements that went unrecognized and the sacrifices that went unthanked, about the fortune I had built while being told I was worthless, about the family I had lost and the family I had created in its place. I leaned down and kissed his forehead, breathing in the clean scent of his shampoo, feeling the profound gift of this ordinary moment. "Yes, baby," I said. "I'm finally happy." And for the first time in 32 years, it was completely true. I turned off his lamp and stood in the doorway for a moment, watching his eyes flutter closed, watching peace settle over his features. Then I walked to my own room in my own house, surrounded by the life I had built from nothing but determination and hope. Wealth wasn't what I was searching for. Neither was revenge. In the end, the thing I wanted most, the thing I finally found, was peace. And peace, I discovered, is the greatest fortune of all. And that brings us to the end of Melissa's incredible journey. A woman who was called worthless by her own family, who was thrown into the snow on Christmas Eve with her children, who discovered that the people who should have loved her most had stolen from her for decades. But instead of letting bitterness consume her, she chose to build something beautiful from the ashes of betrayal. Melissa's story reminds us that our worth is never determined by those who refuse to see it. Sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones who were supposed to protect us. And sometimes the greatest revenge is simply living well, finding peace, and breaking the cycle of pain for the next generation. If this story touched your heart, if you felt Melissa's pain and celebrated her triumph, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss another powerful story like this one. Your support means everything to us and helps us continue bringing you content that moves and inspires. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had to distance yourself from toxic family members to protect your own peace? Do you believe Melissa made the right choice in forgiving her mother? What would you have done differently in her situation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories and opinions matter to us, and we read every single comment. Thank you for staying until the very end. Until next time, remember, peace is the greatest fortune of all.